Rocky Johnson was a Canadian-born wrestler, debuting in 1964 and winning countless titles, and along with Tony Atlas, becoming the first WWF Black Tag Team title holders. For more than 20 years, Rocky Johnson was a top-tier professional wrestler sought after by promoters from all over the world. He's also known as being the father of Dwayne Johnson. Although he fathered at least 8 children from at least half a dozen women, he had little to no relations with most of his other kids throughout their lives, and even refused to have contact with some of them. He was considered among the top wrestlers from his era, but his behaviors outside the ring would foreshadow his life, including extramarital affairs, several accusations of sexual assault, and inappropriate actions towards females in and out of the wrestling business. His autobiography, Soul Man, The Rocky Johnson Story, was pulled from shelves when payment disputes arose between Johnson and the co-writer Scott Teal, when Johnson refused to pay the full amount that was agreed upon during the writing of the book. On February 25, 2008, he was announced as an inductee along with his father-in-law, High Chief Peter Maivia, into the WWE Hall of Fame. Both Johnson and his father-in-law were inducted by his son Dwayne Johnson. He passed away in 2020 when he became ill and refused to see a doctor. This is the story of Rocky Soul Man Johnson. Rocky Johnson was born Wade Douglas Bullis on August 24, 1944 in Amherst, Nova Scotia. He was 12 years old before he realized there was such a thing as professional wrestling. The wrestling season in Nova Scotia began in May and finished up in early October. It was known as a summer territory. Because of the heavy snowfalls during the winter, the wrestlers couldn't always get from town to town. In spring 1956, Rocky saw some men nailing posters on telephone poles and placing them in store windows. He'd never heard about pro wrestling before that, but in the days that followed, he heard the kids at school talking about it. He was intrigued and made up his mind to go see what it was all about. In his autobiography, he would state, "Amherst was where I got my first peek at something behind the scenes that the average wrestling fan never saw. One night, the babyfaces signed my notebook and then got into a nearby car. As I watched them pull away, I saw 2 sets of eyes peek up over the back seat. The eyes belonged to the 2 heels the other 2 had just finished wrestling. Just a short time before, they had been trying to kill the guys who had just gotten into the front seat. The 4 wrestlers were breaking one of the cardinal rules that most wrestling promoters enforce strictly. Baby faces and heels were never to travel together. The wrestlers often broke that rule though, especially in those days. They only made $10 or $15 a night, so they rode together to save money. I didn't know at that time, but I remember thinking it was strange to see the 4 of them in the same car." Rocky left home at the age of 14 to seek his fortune. Excelling in gymnastics in school as well as track and field, the foundation of his athletic career was laid. He made his way to Toronto, and after a short stint in boxing, claiming to have sparred with greats such as Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, he decided to make professional wrestling his career. He ended up pursuing formal training from Jack Wentworth, who trained notables like Ivan Koloff. He had his first match in 1965 and never looked back. Wade Bullis disappeared from the face of the earth, and a man named Rocky Johnson emerged. He chose the name Rocky Johnson as a tribute to 2 of his favorite boxing greats, Rocky Marciano and Jack Johnson. His first pro wrestling match was against Firpo Zbyszko. As wrestling was not yet a viable option to fully support himself, he would work odd jobs in warehouses, construction, and drive truck. As a direct descendant of slaves, Rocky took pride not only in his career record, but for what he had done in regards to those of his race. As a black Nova Scotian, he is a descendant of black loyalists who immigrated to Nova Scotia after escaping from a plantation in the southern United States after the American Revolutionary War. Rocky got a tremendous rub from fellow Canadian Billy Watson, the 3rd ever NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Rocky was presented as Watson's protege, a move that he attributed to Watson's political ambitions and that being associated with a black Canadian wrestler would eventually help Watson win over black voters. As a result, Rocky got an impressive push that raised his profile as a performer in huge venues and other promotions. Through the late 1960s, he would wrestle all across Canada and down the California coast. On April 3, 1967, he won the NWA Vancouver Canadian Tag Team titles with Don Leo Jonathan defeating Chris and John Tolos. And in 1970, won the NWA Los Angeles America Tag Team titles with Earl Maynard defeating the Masked Medics. He was a top contender in the National Wrestling Alliance in the 1970s, receiving title matches against then world champion Terry Funk and Harley Race. He was well suited for tag team wrestling, winning several regional tag team championships in the NWA. Rocky wrestled on and off in the Memphis promotion, often feuding with Jerry Lawler and even winning Lawler's crown at one point. He also wrestled under a mask as Sweet Ebony Diamond in the Mid-Atlantic area. In the South, he broke down race barriers when he became the first African American to win the Southern, Georgia, and Florida heavyweight titles. Rocky recounted in his autobiography Soul Man that he met his first wife, Una Sparks, at a dance while he was training to become a boxer. Una was also from Nova Scotia and a devout Jehovah's Witness. They had 2 children, Curtis and Wanda, whom he thanked at his 2008 WWE Hall of Fame induction. While married to Una, he became romantically involved with Ata Maivia, daughter of wrestling legend High Chief Peter Maivia. She met Rocky after Maivia and Johnson were tag team partners. Peter Maivia disapproved of their relationship because Johnson was already married and a wrestler. Their son Dwayne was born May 2, 1972. With 1976 came a much publicized wrestler vs. boxer match between Muhammad Ali and New Japan Pro Wrestler founder Antonio Inoki. And Memphis-based wrestler Jerry the King Lawler tapped Rocky Johnson to be the credible boxing talent to take on the King. The angle made use of photos of Johnson sparring with famous boxers, and the 2 stars clashed a few times throughout 1976 and 1977. At one point, the NWA Southern Heavyweight Championship was on the line, and Rocky managed to defeat Lawler for the belt. Rocky stated that, in order to provide for his 2 families, he adopted a frugal lifestyle on the road. He survived on beer, sliced cheese, and bologna, and was not a partier. He did not reveal if Una knew about Ata and Dwayne, but stated that she gave him an ultimatum to quit pro wrestling or they would have to separate as Jehovah's Witnesses. Didn't believe in blood sport. He stated that he and Una parted amicably and remained good friends. He obtained a divorce in Texas, then filed for a marriage license in Florida on December 21, 1978 to marry Ata. By marrying her, he became a member of the famous Samoan wrestling family. In 1982, Rocky feuded with Don Morocco, Greg Valentine, Mike Sharp, Buddy Rose, and Adrian Adonis. He was then paired with Tony Atlas as a tag team. They defeated the Wild Samoans for the Tag Team Championship on the December 10, 1983 episode of Championship Wrestling. They were the first African Americans to hold the WWF Tag Team titles. Together they were billed as the Soul Patrol. They would hold the belts for 154 days, defending them against teams like Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper, Mr. Fuji and Tiger Chung Lee, and the Wild Samoans in several matches. On April 17, 1984, Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch defeated Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas for the WWF Tag Team titles. As Soul Patrol, Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas were a compatible team in the ring, as Johnson was more athletic and Atlas was a powerhouse wrestler. However, their relationship outside the ring wasn't exactly smooth, often fraught with drama. Behind the scenes, Tony Atlas reportedly had a drug problem that interfered with his work, and such unreliability caused tension with his tag team partner. There are even rumors that the two came to blows backstage. After leaving WWF in June 1985, in 1986 he legally changed his name to Rocky Johnson. In September of 1987, Johnson was arrested and charged with aggravated rape of a 19-year-old Tennessee woman. According to the woman, she was assaulted inside the vehicle by Johnson. He was arrested and his bail was set at $10,000. The woman claimed that she met Johnson at a local wrestling match and spoke to him about becoming a wrestler, and Rocky told her he would help her train her and learn how to take falls. Later, he offered to give her a ride home as a birthday present. During the trip home, they made various stops, drank vodka, and talked wrestling. She testified Rocky never forced her to drink the vodka or tried to touch her until after she passed out. The next thing she knew, she woke up at the hospital with several cuts and scratches. But Rocky told a different story. According to his statement, the woman's family wanted him to attend her birthday party, and at some point the woman asked Rocky to go with her to get something to drink, he told authorities. Shortly afterwards, he stated the woman began to fondle him and perform oral on him despite his protest he was married. The next year, a jury refused to indict Rocky on the charges because the woman initially stated that she was intoxicated and couldn't clearly remember what happened. Rocky claimed he was set up by rival wrestlers, although some were led to believe that he was blacklisted from wrestling by wrestling in Saudi Arabia and violating his contract with the WWF. It was this incident that had him blacklisted from wrestling, leading him to alcoholism and a strained relationship with the rest of his family. According to Luann Grable, who was a mistress of Rocky Johnson for over 25 years, Rocky was a serial cheater. She said, "Rocky was a serial cheater. It wasn't until later I realized he had a woman in virtually every arena that he wrestled." In the latter part of the 1980s, he would spend time wrestling mostly in Hawaii and the World Wrestling Council in Puerto Rico. He would retire from wrestling in 1991. But according to Vance Nevada's records, he wrestled a handful of shows in Florida in 1993 and wrestled Dan Spivey in 1994, winning the CCW heavyweight title. In 2000, Florida Mayor Harry Venus took a personal interest in Rocky Johnson and hired him as his personal trainer. Later, he would be also instrumental in getting Rocky hired at the Pine Island Community Center in Davie, Florida, as a part-time activities leader, earning just $9.11 per hour. Johnson was investigated for several cases of misconduct, including theft and unwanted groping of female co-workers. He later faced charges of battery and theft after he allegedly took home a piece of athletic equipment, as well as inappropriately grabbing a female co-worker, and also rumors spread that he had asked a 12-year-old girl to play strip poker with him. According to the Broward State Attorney's Office, while noting there was sufficient evidence that Johnson had groped his co-worker, declined to prosecute because the woman feared the publicity it would bring her. The issue was called Rockygate by people in the town. Rocky received numerous perks during his less than 4 months as an employee, including use of a town-issued cellular phone, use of a town car, and advance warning of disciplinary action before he was suspended. Reports also indicated Rocky kept the cell phone he was supposed to turn in, racking up an almost $1,000 bill. The police stated that the allegations were not criminal, but administrative, meaning Rocky only violated personal rules. While Rocky Johnson would only hold one championship in the WWE, he was actually a highly decorated champion across the various territories affiliated with the National Wrestling Alliance. In addition to singles titles, Johnson and WWE legend Pat Patterson scored 4 NWA tag title reigns in the California wrestling scene. Before showing up in the WWF, he wrestled in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, enjoying 2 reigns with the NWA World Television title while feuding with Greg the Hammer Valentine. After retiring, Rocky, along with Pat Patterson, trained his son Dwayne to wrestle. While he initially resisted his son's entry into what he knew to be an extremely difficult business, Johnson agreed to train him on the condition that he would not go easy on him. Rocky was instrumental in getting Dwayne, later dubbed Rocky Maivia, signed to a WWF developmental deal. Initially, Rocky had an on-camera presence at his son's matches and jumped into the ring on his behalf after he was attacked by the Sultan and the Iron Sheik at WrestleMania 13. He was not seen on camera again after the Rocky Maivia character flopped, and soon Dwayne achieved crossover popularity as a cocky heel The Rock. Atta and Rocky divorced in 2003. During his wrestling years, he was known for his extramarital affairs. In early 2003, Rocky was hired as a trainer for the WWE developmental territory Ohio Valley Wrestling, but was let go in May due to unknown reasons. He made a return to the ring and defeated Mabel in a boxing match at Memphis Wrestling on November 29, 2003. On February 25, 2008, Rocky was announced as an inductee into the WWE Hall of Fame along with his father-in-law, High Chief Peter Maivia. Both Johnson and his father-in-law were inducted into the Hall of Fame by his son The Rock. For all the entertainment in the ring that he provided to fans throughout his lengthy career, the late Rocky Johnson's final public action, writing his autobiography, had been a disaster. The book had to be pulled from shelves and its author had proved background into Johnson's refusal to pay the full amount owing. Soul Man, the Rocky Johnson story, was officially released on October 15th by ECW Press, a publisher based in Toronto, Ontario. It was quietly removed from the ECW Press website and is no longer available to distributors or bookstores. A number of factors were taken into account. First and foremost, how Rocky Johnson dealt with his co-author Scott Teal. Teal is the man behind Crowbar Press, which has published dozens and dozens of autobiographies and record books, preserving pro wrestling history. He was also the publisher of the long-time-running Whatever Happened To newsletter. Johnson sought out Teal after going down the road with a couple of other authors, including New York's Seth Turner, who is currently a key player in the launch of the International Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and Slam, as well as wrestling producer Greg Oliver. Teal and Johnson had a deal to write the autobiography, but not anything in writing as a contract. In their initial discussions, Teal and Johnson agreed that all advance money and royalties would be split 50-50. ECW Press was not involved with their deal, and the publisher had a contract solely with Johnson. This is not uncommon in the writing business, particularly because Johnson was still a Canadian citizen, and a Canadian publisher can take advantage of grants and tax breaks if it chooses. Teal is an American living in Tennessee. Over 4 months, Teal did a total of 46 interviews with Johnson, much research into his life and times, and wrote up the manuscript. It was Teal that worked with the editors and layout staff at ECW Press to finish the book, and he was also tasked to collect some of the photos that appeared in the book, 2 of which were personally taken by him. The foreword of the book is listed as being written by Dwayne Johnson. Teal said in a Facebook post that he never talked to The Rock once, and that he has audio interviews with Rocky Johnson that give the blessing to write his son's words. During the writing process, Rocky only sent one check to Teal for $2,789.50. Shortly before the book hit shelves, Teal received a letter from John B. Cother, attorney at law in Orange City, Florida. The letter, dated August 30th, 2019, acknowledges that Teal was hired and paid with the writing of the Rocky Johnson story, but be advised that your obligations to the said autobiography has ceased, and all other entitlements to any past, current, or future payments with regards to said autobiography. By their verbal agreement, Johnson owed Teal half of his royalty money paid by ECW Press, which would have been paid in 3 parts, the third and final coming shortly after publication. ECW Press was informed about the lawyer's letter, and any attempts to get Johnson to finish his payment to the writer failed. According to a source at ECW Press, there were other issues with Rocky Johnson aside from the failure to pay Teal. That resulted in the decision to pull the Soul Man Rocky Johnson story. Teal has kept relatively silent on the issue, but the death of Rocky Johnson on January the 15th and the subsequent references to his recently published autobiography have prompted Teal to clear the air. Greg Oliver had an ECW Press contract with Rocky Johnson to write his autobiography before the work with Teal began, but Johnson ended communication over the book deal and never signed his copy of the contract. Oliver and Johnson never talked again. Oliver did, however, provide research material to Scott Teal for the project for a small fee, out of respect for all Teal's work through the years. Teal and Oliver have worked on numerous other projects together. On December 20th, 2019, Rocky Johnson joined the board of directors of the International Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. On January 15th, 2020, at the age of 75, Rocky died of a pulmonary embolism at the home his son bought for him in Florida. The embolism was caused by a blood clot that traveled from his leg. B. Brian Blair told the Associated Press that Rocky thought he had the flu or something, but refused to go see a doctor. Hulk Hogan tweeted condolences, describing Rocky as a great man, a great friend, and one of only a few that was kind and helpful when he first broke in. Johnson was married to Sheila Northern at the time of his death. In 2022, Sports Illustrated published an article stating that Rocky had 5 other children in separate relationships via DNA testing in the 2010s, which connected them to Rocky's brother Ricky. All 5 were refused in-person contact by Rocky in his lifetime, and have not been contacted by Rocky's 3 other known children, but have reunited personally with Ricky Johnson and each other. That was a rocky past of Rocky Johnson.
You always searching for a better thing, wanna replace me. I'm in a place that I've never been, it's worse than lonely. Can someone tell me they see good in me, there's good in me? Cause I got doubts, I got doubts.
This is a Brooklyn Brawler, and you're watching another original wrestling documentary.
It was the early 2000s, as peer-to-peer file-sharing application Napster rocked the foundation of the music industry, eventually losing a wave of lawsuits and filing for bankruptcy. Dr. Dre headlined the Up in Smoke tour, which featured Ice Cube, Eminem, Snoop Dogg, among others, and made stops in 44 cities and grossed over $22 million. Tech giant AOL purchased Warner Brothers for a reported $182 billion in one of the biggest media mergers in U.S. history. And professional wrestling had just gone through a massive shakeup. The then World Wrestling Federation had just bought its 2 biggest rivals in World Championship Wrestling and Extreme Championship Wrestling the year prior, effectively monopolizing the televised professional wrestling business. If you wanted to see the top guys or any wrestling on cable, it was WWF or bust. 2 camps would form in the wake of the consolidation of the top 3. 2 camps that would become, for a while, the number 2 and number 3 promotions in the United States. Wrestling was never hotter. From music to movies to cartoons, sports entertainment injected its influence into every area of pop culture. As the popularity of the pastime grew, so did the popularity of the internet, and the number of homes that had internet access rose, and a new phenomenon was born: online predators. And with reality TV on the cusp of producing some of the greatest digital content ever, a new sensation was born: NBC's To Catch a Predator. Anchored by a borderline vigilante group, Perverted Justice. In 2004, all these entities would be thrown into a blender and brewed into a fruity fusion, which would be poured over the life of Rob Feinstein and leave him denying allegations for years to come. This is the story of Ring of Honor Wrestling and its controversial owner, Rob Feinstein.
And remember this man? We originally thought his name was Timothy, another local man looking for a young girl. But he turned out to be this man, Robert Feinstein, a Langhorne businessman who promotes wrestling events. He has his own website with plenty of pictures of himself. We tried to catch up with him at his office and his home, but each time he saw us, he ran. And according to his chat log, he thought he was meeting a 14-year-old boy.
The tale of Rob Feinstein is an unusual, often conflicting one. The video company which he founded, RF Video, was based on blatant and serial copyright infringement of digital material from around the globe, yet Feinstein has always been consumed with safekeeping his own content and material. The very people he had the greatest contempt for, internet wrestling fans and message board posters, are the same people who he had marketed all of his products to. With the collapse of ECW in April of 2001, Rob Feinstein and his video company RF Video were in trouble. RF Video had been distributing ECW's content on home video for some time, and the promotion had been RF's biggest seller. The company relied on a deal with ECW that allowed them to not only tape most of their live events, but also allowed them to sell their products to hundreds, if not thousands of fans that would be in attendance to those events in any given weekend. Now that it was all gone, RF Video needed something to keep business booming. Knowing ECW's general audience, wrestling fans who had a preference in more violent hardcore wrestling, Feinstein first attempted to make a deal with the fairly new Combat Zone Wrestling, which had been the second most popular hardcore promotion in the United States. CZW at the time was a regional promotion that had a few video distribution deals, including one with RF Video. Attempts were made to substitute ECW with a variety of independent groups, with Upstart Promotion Combat Zone Wrestling being the most successful. The relationship with CZW saw RF Video book and pay, out of their own pocket, several ECW wrestlers in an effort to appeal to the customers they were losing as a result of ECW closing. During this same period, CCW had made a deal with a small video company, Smart Mark Video, to tape and distribute their live events. As both video companies each taped and sold their own versions of CCW events, attempts were made by RF Video to buy into the company. CCW's owner, John Zandig, wasn't interested, likely because the Smart Mark Video deal was more beneficial. While RF Video would pay a flat fee to tape and sell an event, Smart Mark Video would set up profit-sharing deals with organizations, allowing for more financial gains. Most organizations simply didn't trust Feinstein enough to do similar deals with him. Feinstein decided the next best strategy was to start his own promotion, Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor made its debut in the wrestling world on February 23, 2002, with an event in ECW's home city, Philadelphia. Called The Era of Honor Begins. Ring of Honor's first card featured quite a few popular names from the independent scene, Christopher Daniels and the late Jay Briscoe, to name a few of the most popular, but also featured a big name in Eddie Guerrero, who at the time was not involved with the World Wrestling Federation. While the financials of Ring of Honor at the time were speculated to be a bust, the first Ring of Honor event and the company itself seems to have been a success as the events continued to go on. The company expanded to have events across the East Coast, aligned itself with Florida-based indie promotion Full Impact Pro, and by 2003 had even held an event in England with Frontier Wrestling Alliance promotion. Part of this can be attributed to a few deals Feinstein made in late 2002 and early 2003. The biggest deal perhaps was the alliance with wrestling magazine publisher and former Belushi Coke dealer Kerry Silkin, who agreed to financially back Ring of Honor. Another major acquisition was Booker Gabe Sapolsky, who had previously been an assistant to ECW head Paul Heyman. Sapolsky had joined RF Video in late 2001 and developed what became the Honor Code, the inverse of the hardcore nature of ECW. Whereas anything went in ECW, Ring of Honor had a system of handshakes before matches, and the hardcore stuff was saved for personal feuds. It was an unusual system for the business, but it worked in establishing heels by simply not following the code. On top of those deals, Ring of Honor also worked out deals both nationally and internationally. One of those deals was with the other wrestling promotion launched around the same time as Ring of Honor, Total Nonstop Action, allowing Ring of Honor to use TNA's talent, which at the time included AJ Styles, Homicide, and Amazing Red. The other was with All Japan Pro Wrestling, which in turn allowed their personnel, such as the legendary Great Muta, to appear at the 2003 Final Battle event. Ring of Honor appeared to be on an unstoppable train on the rails to success. They seemed to have everything in place: financial backing, a strong roster consisting of many wrestlers from all around the world, and a very successful video market. What could possibly go wrong? The name Perverted Justice may sound familiar to some. They're best known for their work on the Dateline segment To Catch a Predator. Unfortunately, Perverted Justice also plays a role in the history of Ring of Honor. Sometime before To Catch a Predator, Perverted Justice teamed up with the NBC affiliate WCAU to host their own Predator Sting. Slam Wrestling Net would report, a noted wrestling personality in Philadelphia, Feinstein, was allegedly the target of a media sting focusing on adults who cruise internet chat rooms attempting to contact underage individuals for sexual encounters. NBC 10, WCAU TV, a network affiliate in Philadelphia, and PervertedJustice.com joined together on the group media bust. NBC 10 rented a decoy house while Perverted Justice worked the chat rooms as underage individuals. Adults who expressed interest in meeting the minors for sex were then directed to the house where the NBC 10 film crew was waiting to catch them on camera. Perverted Justice claims that a contributor, J Alternative, contacted the site asking for information on Ring of Honor due to an individual messaging him on a Philadelphia AOL chat room who represented himself as a wrestler. The conversations J Alternative had with the wrestler ID'd as RF Wrestling lasted 2 days and included 2 phone calls. J Alternative portrayed himself as a 14-year-old boy. NBC 10 aired a story showing a man who identified himself as Rob Feinstein arriving at the setup house and then leaving the scene once a camera crew and reporter confronted him. NBC 10 claims to have made the identification based on video analysis and the license plate number on the car. NBC 10 did return Slam Wrestling's calls but would only verify how they identified Feinstein. At this time, no charges have been filed against Feinstein. And indeed, there were chat logs. We won't go into depth about the logs, but here is an example of the messages exchanged. How old are you? 23. Yeah, but that's older than me, and you can drive and drink, and I'm 14. And no one ever wants to see me because they say I'm jailbait. But I can't meet guys my age because they might tell guys at school. Damn, 14. See? I'll pretend you said 18. I look 18, I can buy smokes. You're so adorable. Damn, you're a little like 40 minutes from me. Or we could chill. And Rob Feinstein indeed tried to chill, and got busted. In the news clip, there was no doubt it was Rob. He had linked photos of himself from the promotion's website and clarified he was in the business. Ring of Honor, at the time of the bust, a critical success but not a financial one. Feinstein's stature in wrestling, though, had improved and had grown from the low point of the 90s, where his antics on internet message boards and the overall quality of his product had turned much of the wrestling community against him. On the day he walked up the steps leading to the bust house, he was the owner of arguably the second or third largest wrestling organization in the United States, and with the help of financial backer Kerry Silkin, things could only go up from there. Things were going good for him, but that would all change the moment the door opened and he found himself on the other side of the camera lens. The news broke out rather quickly, and word spread rapidly. Fans and wrestling personalities began to distance themselves from Feinstein, and within 24 hours, he announced his departure from his executive positions in both Ring of Honor and RF Video. Perverted Justice would post on their website. Philadelphia news affiliate NBC 10 and ourselves at pervertedjustice.com recently came together to set up a group media bust in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A group media bust is an agreement where a media outlet rents a house or apartment, gives our site the information, and we work chat rooms as underage individuals, sending overage individuals to the house to meet the cameras and be exposed for their acts. At roughly 10 p.m. on February 29th, Perverted Justice contributor J Alternative messaged the owner of pervertedjustice.com inquiring for information on wrestling due to an individual messaging him online who represented himself as a wrestler. What followed is a story that is amazing, even to ourselves at Perverted Justice. Ring of Honor owner Rob Feinstein had messaged J Alternative in a Philadelphia AOL chat room and responded favorably to the idea of meeting a 14-year-old boy for immoral purposes. The conversation spanned 2 days and 2 phone calls. Both individuals who had contact with Rob Feinstein while pretending to be a 14-year-old boy named Brandon are not wrestling fans. They know very little about wrestling, and they had no clue who Rob Feinstein was until he came across our volunteers. Rob Feinstein was not targeted by our organization. Instead, he ended up targeting one of our contributors and is now paying for that decision. Rob Feinstein showed up at our group media bus door to meet NBC Philadelphia reporter Harry Harrison on the day he initiated the conversation with Brandon. This occurred on March 1st. Feinstein ran to his silver Lexus and peeled off from the scene of the meeting. This was all captured on camera. Even Ring of Honor talent had comments about it, such as future WWE star Samoa Joe. Rob, please do not allow yourself to ever enter my site. My anger for you and your actions far surpass anyone or anything imaginable. Your heinous, terrible acts are beyond excuse and explanation. Your shame is yours alone and forced upon us by your arrogance and lies. Though others formerly close to you are holding their tongue and focusing their efforts on salvaging what your sick, selfish, and stupid actions have caused, I have the luxury of telling you that I hope you get exactly what you deserve. My gut instinct tells me I hope you are found one morning without breath, but in reality, as a decent human being, unlike you, I hope you find some help for your sickness. TNA also pulled out of their deal with Ring of Honor, depriving them of crossover talent, some of whom had championships or were booked to become champions in Ring of Honor. Despite this being March, however, Rob didn't leave the company for another 3 months, though suspicions that he remained involved were high, despite the insistence of those involved with the companies. Feinstein himself was telling people that he was still owner and that he was just laying low and they were waiting for things to blow over, which just added to the confusion. The general feeling among wrestlers was that he was still involved, but they weren't sure. Confirmation that he was still involved came in June when Ring of Honor finally severed its ties with Feinstein and RF Video after he was bought out of his Ring of Honor ownership, his share of the promotion eventually winding up in the hands of Kerry Silkin. RF Video would remain his, though by the time the company had little value without the Ring of Honor library and with all the negative attention it had received. Back to where he started when ECW fell apart. Rob Feinstein had to figure out a way to make money. On top of this, he had disgraced himself by being caught trying to prey on a minor. Regardless, he hadn't been arrested or convicted, and eventually in 2014 wrote a now deleted statement, which thankfully had been preserved by wrestling journalists, where he would make the following claims. Nobody knows the internal fighting that was going on and how Kerry wanted to start his own RF Video by filming indie shows and doing shoot interviews. Nobody knows how I was going to fire a few key staff members before that day in March of 2004. A month before the incident, I had a major power play with Kerry once again at the ROH show in Baltimore, Maryland, where Kerry asked for majority ownership of ROH, or again he threatened that he would not pay any of the talent that night and he would also stop funding the company. Keep in mind, they wanted me out of ROH before that day in March. I never did anything wrong or illegal, and I was set up. There are more personal facts that I will not get into. There were other motives to get me out of the company. To make a long story short, Rob believed it was a setup to get him out of the company so that Kerry could take charge that, even in Rob's words, involved perverted justice. On top of that, he would also state, I also never hid my personal life from my friends. I never did anything wrong in the past. I did indeed meet someone who I talked to. I met them in an adult chat room. I saw pictures of this person as they had sent me their pictures. The person was not a kid, but a college person. I had talked to the person on the phone, and it was clear as day it was an adult. The chat you claim you read is not real. Anyone can add anything that they want to text. The infamous LOL, I'll pretend you said 18 line, is not mine. I never said half of the conversation that they claim I did. The bottom line is that I was 100% set up, and I never once talked about having sex or anything to that nature. For years, Feinstein had alternated between claiming innocence and pretending like the NBC 10 incident never happened. Rob also threatened to sue the NBC affiliate and Perverted Justice. Throughout the years, Perverted Justice had its own controversies. Parts of chat logs missing, accusations of entrapment, overly aggressive decoys, and several times charges against predators had been stayed due to the organization not submitting their hard drives as evidence as legally required. Luckily for Rob, he soon found another market to keep his video company afloat: shoot interviews from wrestlers who did not care about Rob's past. And when it comes to shoot interviews, RF Video gets a lot of notable names in what is apparently solid content. On top of this, wrestlers to this day talk about Feinstein's behavior, such as Joey Janela saying Feinstein hit on him when Janela was 17. RF could have been Tony Khan if he played his cards right. Spoiler, he didn't. RF knew the tremendous wealth of talent on the indie scene at the time. At one point, his roster consisted of Daniel Bryan, CM Punk, Low Key, AJ Styles, and Christopher Daniels, and none of these guys were even the champ. If he hadn't done what he did, I would imagine pay-per-view was a goal, and his tape selling could have funded a major launch. Instead, he hawks his merchandise wherever he can and tries to swindle whoever possible. As a famous WWE Hall of Famer once said, everybody's got a price.
Hey, it's not the same. If I close my eyes, maybe I'll feel you again.
This is the Brooklyn Brawler, and you're watching another original wrestling documentary.
Rick Bogner, also known as Rick Titan, was a professional wrestler who was most well known for playing the imposter Razor Ramon in the WWF during late 1996 and early 1997. A storyline at the time which was looked down upon by wrestling fans, but later gained a somewhat cult-like admiration. Alongside the fake Razor gimmick, a young Glenn Jacobs would also play the part of an imposter Diesel. At the time, the real men behind the gimmick, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, had jumped ship to competitor WCW, and the World Wrestling Federation was scrambling to recapture the viewers' eyes that wandered to the competition as Hall and Nash were about to be part of one of the biggest storylines ever in the history of sports entertainment. Rick would make his final appearance in the WWF in early 1997 and made his way to the USWA, still using the Razor Ramon gimmick, but would soon give it up and begin using the name Rick Titan, before leaving the company altogether once his one-year contract expired. His career began in the Canadian Indies and was a regular in frontier martial arts in Japan, wrestling under the name Big Titan. He would also make appearances in CWA, WAR, ECW, AAA, WWC, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and eventually returned to Canada during Stampede Wrestling's revamp in 1999. He would also perform under various other monikers such as Mega Mask, Razor Rick, Rick Titan, and Ty Doe. After retiring from wrestling, he became an author and a motivational speaker and was known for his huge heart. Imagine when you die, people use the word fake to describe you, even though you spend a lifetime dedicated to your passion, but only remembered for a very small portion of your life's work. This is the story of Rick Bogner.
He was known as Big Rick to many in the wrestling community, a giant of a man with a big heart. That's what friends say about a former professional wrestler from Calgary who died unexpectedly last month. Tyson Fedor reports.
Rick Titan Bogner, also known as Razor Ramon II in the WWE, died suddenly September 20th from a heart attack. Bogner retired from wrestling in 2000 after suffering career-ending injuries to his neck and back.
I know that in the past he'd had some additions with some problems with painkillers.
Pain he continually felt until his death. After wrestling, he became a motivational speaker.
You want to be a great leader. Let's try that again. Are you ready?
Bogner was 49.
You've got $1 million face, but you're a part of every masquerade. Don't say a word about it.
Rick Bogner was born in Surrey, BC on January 16, 1970. By 10 years old, he was already making local newspapers for cross-country racing in 1980, placing 14th out of over 1,000 participants, and in 1981, finishing first in the javelin throw and shot put. He had a love for martial arts and even achieved a black belt in Aikido, which is a mix between judo and karate. He became a wrestling fan at the age of 16 when he saw a match between Ric Flair and Ronnie Garvin. Already towering most of his peers at 6'5" and weighing 250 pounds, he decided that would be a viable career path. He graduated from Earl Marriott Secondary in Surrey and began digging around trying to find ways to get into the business. According to Rick, he had a friend of a friend whose wife worked in a bank with someone who was married to a wrestler in Vancouver's All-Star Wrestling. He attended local all-star wrestling shows in Cloverdale, but according to Rick, it was pretty hokey-doke wrestling. But when he watched Stampede Wrestling from Calgary, he knew that was in a different league. At 18, he packed his bags and headed to Calgary, Alberta, Canada. He enrolled in Mount Royal College in Calgary studying English, literature, and psychology, but still had his heart set on pro wrestling and dropped out after one semester. At 6'6", he couldn't handle sitting in a tiny little desk. He began training with the Hart family and attending Stampede wrestling shows, but would soon suffer a setback after he broke his ankle attempting a backflip off the top rope, trying to imitate Tom McGee. Around this time, Stampede Wrestling was shutting down. He would spend the next 2 years as a bouncer in different bars on Electric Avenue in Calgary, and bouncing around the limited independent promotions in Western Canada. In 1989, he would end up in West 4 Wrestling Alliance in Winnipeg, Manitoba, building his ring resume facing everyone from Ken Patera to Shikadan Al Casey. During his time with Stampede Wrestling, he met Ricky Fuji, who he would develop a personal friendship with. In 1991, Ricky passed the tape of Rick to Onita, who ran Frontier Martial Arts, who at this time was on the hunt for big North American wrestlers, and before he knew it, he was debuting in FMW as Big Rick Titan. On January 15, 1992, the day before his 22nd birthday, he became the FMW Heavyweight Champion. He would hold the title for 15 days, dropping it to Tarzan Goto. Rick found a great deal of success in Japan both as a single star and forming a dominating tag team with Mike Awesome. In 1994, he spent 6 months wrestling in Austria and Germany and CWA. He made a brief return to Canada working for Canadian Rocky Mountain Wrestling, feuding with Bad News Allen, and becoming the CRMW Heavyweight Champion, while splitting his time appearing in War, Wrestling and Romance in Japan, going back and forth every 2 weeks. In the summer of 1996, after receiving a call from Sabu, he appeared in ECW. Back in the locker room, Rick did his Razor Ramon impersonation as a joke, and Paul Heyman saw dollar signs. They made a plan to play a prank on Shane Douglas, who had real-life heat with Scott Hall at the time. There was an incident before a show when the crew and talent would communicate with walkie-talkies while preparing for the event. Rick got on with an unsuspecting Shane Douglas, who was also one of the bookers at the time, and did the Scott Hall impression. He got him. Shane told him to do it in the ring. Rick slicked his hair back, put on a vest he had from Germany, had a toothpick in his mouth, and came out to Lowrider by War and called himself Slice and Dice Ramirez, as a play on serial killer Richard Ramirez. Simultaneously, Bret Hart was lobbying the WWF to give Rick a shot. Paul Heyman was in Bruce Pritchard's ear telling him about Rick's spot-on Razor Ramon imitation. In August of that year, he appeared in a dark match on WWF Raw in Columbus, Ohio, defeating Frank Stiletto. Rick thought it went well, but didn't hear anything back and just went on with his life. Then one day after a workout, he came home to a message from Vince McMahon on his answering machine. Rick was excited and immediately called Vince back. His excitement was short-lived when Vince told him he was going to be his next Razor Ramon, as at the time the real Razor Ramon Scott Hall had left for WCW. Because the WWF owned the gimmicks of both Hall and Nash portrayed, and were sour with them leaving for WCW, and somewhat portraying the same mannerisms as their previous gimmicks, McMahon was determined to prove they could put anyone else in the gimmicks with the same success. Rick had two choices: either go along with the idea, or tell Vince McMahon to forget it, and possibly blow any chance of ever making it to the WWF. So he packed his bags and headed for Stamford, Connecticut. Rick was now making double the money he was making in Japan. Expecting a lot of heat in the locker room, Rick would comment on how Shawn Michaels even gave him pointers on how to throw punches more like Scott Hall. But according to Rick, Vince taught him most of Scott's mannerisms, from how to walk to how to look at the crowd. Vince was obviously angry over Hall and Nash jumping ship to his competitor WCW, and had an attitude he created the Razor Ramon and Diesel gimmick and made Hall and Nash headliners, and could do it again. Little did he know, the new positions Hall and Nash were now in the NWO were about to change wrestling forever. In early September 1996 on Raw, Jim Ross, who had now turned into a heel character, announced Razor Ramon and Diesel would be returning to the WWF. After walking in front of live fans for the first time, Rick would admit the crowd was a lot worse on him than he thought they would be. As he walked past a disappointed look on fans' faces, swearing at him, calling him a fake, and chanting they wanted Scott Hall back. He realized this might have been a mistake. Rick still tried his best to sell the gimmick as best as he could. It was bittersweet. He made it to the WWF, which was his dream, but knew this wasn't going to last. In the September 16, 1996 Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer would write, WWF created a story of Razor Ramon and Diesel returning as an attempt to try and get ratings in a Monday night battle that the company has consistently lost, in a running angle that became the top item of interest in the company, thus overwhelming its hype for the coming pay-per-view show. Jim Ross said he had the biggest news story of his 20-year career and would reveal it on the hotline. However, in doing so, he revealed later in the show that Razor Ramon and Diesel were negotiating to return to the WWF. He said he'd have more details on the hotline, and there'd be more information over the weekend on Mania, Action Zone, and Raw. On the hotline, which no doubt did near-record business, Ross basically said negotiations were taking place, and he had got this information from his best source. Despite hype to the contrary, there were no updates on either Mania or Action Zone, as both shows are taped the previous Tuesday, and Vince McMahon didn't even come up with this angle until Thursday, at which point very few in Titan were clued in on what was going on, and most in the company were stunned by Ross's announcement on the show. On the Monday afternoon, McMahon sent a post online in continuation of this angle, saying that Ross would be forced to apologize for the statements, doing the swerve that they were dropping the angle since most people by this point knew Hall and Nash weren't going back. However, on Raw, Ross said he apologized because his comments upset delicate negotiations with Ramon, but that he was standing by his story and that negotiations with Diesel were still going strong. He continued to promise before every commercial break to have more on the story and at the end of the show as a way to keep viewers and hit the angle hard against the end of the show. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall knew nothing of this angle, finding out amidst a ton of commotion within wrestling while appearing on Friday night at the WCW house show. There is no loophole in the respective contracts, which have more than 2 years left, nor have there been any talks of them rejoining the WWF. Because of all the speculation, particularly online and on hotlines that Friday's announcement caused, the WWF confused that with having done a successful angle. The statement was basically designed as a hotshot angle to reverse a trend which had seen WCW dominate the ratings since it was switched to the 2-hour format in late May. In particular, history over the years has shown that WWF Raw numbers coming back from the 2-week Monday gap after the US Open usually takes a few weeks to get back to normal, and this was seen as a way to pique curiosity and to get the numbers back on track immediately. There was little more to the idea than that, although there was a plan, which may or may not be implemented because numerous people in Titan and most in wrestling think it would be a huge mistake to pay off the angle by using Rick Bogner's War's Big Titan as the bad guy Razor Ramon and Glenn Jacobs, formerly Isaac Yankem, as Big Daddy Cool Diesel. Putting new actors in established roles is commonplace in soap operas and has been done without fans reacting negatively in pro wrestling, with characters such as Doink the Clown in WWF after Matt Osborne was fired, or with the occasional masked wrestlers in Mexico and the United States after a dispute with promoters. But it has never been done in modern times with unmasked, distinctive wrestling stars of such high profile. The general belief in this plan, if implemented, will backfire greatly, even though the belief is that Bogner actually can do Razor Ramon better than Scott Hall, since he did a great job with the gimmick on an ECW show in Allentown, Pennsylvania as Slice and Dice Ramirez. There is even talk that if fans reject the characters, that Titan can always turn them heel, thus boos will be the reaction they want to get from the fans. Of course, there are numerous different kinds of heat and different types of boos, and not all booing heat for a heel is a kind of heat that is a positive. WCW can't react publicly to deny the story because of the lawsuit. Because by reacting and saying that Razor Ramon and Diesel, since the name Kevin Nash and Scott Hall have never been used, or even not using those names and talking about the wrestlers, Titan is referring to be under contract, and not leaving would play into the WWF's hands of the lawsuit and could be construed as admission that they were using Hall and Nash as Diesel and Ramon without using those names publicly. Jim Ross would later admit this was one of the worst mistakes of his career. The WWF continued its Razor Ramon Diesel angle. Rick even cancelled his war tour in Japan to start in the new role with the WWF. Ironically, while Rick was in Japan, Tokyo Sports ran a major story saying he was going to be the new Razor Ramon in the WWF, and how he was told how it's a top secret and nobody knows about, and here the big secret was in a mainstream daily newspaper with a circulation in the 7 figures. Gorilla Monsoon announced that Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were under contract to another organization, and that while he liked Jim Ross, he said he felt someone was hoodwinking the WWF fans. So it was all on Jim Ross, and not the WWF, as the World Wrestling Federation tried to separate itself from the heat, since people considered this angle a fraudulent attempt for ratings. Jim Ross ended up as the scapegoat for the Razor Diesel angle, something that had been clear from the bad reaction to the angle from the second week. After a brief glimpse the night before on the pay-per-view, where Rick Bogner and Glenn Jacobs, dressed as Razor Ramon and Diesel, attacked Savio Vega, the television show was built around teasing their appearance later in the show. It made the WWF come across that much more foolish since Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were shown early on during Nitro, also live, and well before WWF unveiled its new men, they had taken over Nitro and were making a joke about accepting no imitations. WCW had its own inside joke during that show, introducing Michael Jones, formerly Virgil, in the WWF as the new chief of security for the NWO and named him Vince. The new promotional strategy was now to pretend that Rick Bogner and Glenn Jacobs are simply Razor and Diesel, with all the announcers talking about the return of Razor and Diesel, and even Goldust doing a bit, trying to get over how happy he was that the sexy Razor was back in the WWF. Rick worked as a babyface against Stone Cold Steve Austin on some of the Canadian shows, and as a heel against Jake Roberts as well, under the name Giant Titan as opposed to Razor Ramon. Throughout late 1996, the Razor and Diesel characters were being used in less prominent roles in the company, as Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were in the process of forming one of the most popular factions ever, the NWO, and the more the WWF portrayed the imitation gimmicks, the more pathetic it made them look. Rick made his final WWF appearance as Razor Ramon in the 1997 Royal Rumble when he was eliminated in 17 seconds by Ahmed Johnson, but would still use a gimmick as him and Glenn Jacobs were sent to AAA in Mexico and then USWA in Memphis, where they would feud with each other, which culminated in a loser-leave-town match, in which Rick would win as Jacobs was sent back to the WWF, where he was repackaged into Kane. Rick would later publicly throw away the Razor Ramon ring gear and revert back to his previous name, Rick Titan. He would stay in the USWA until his one-year WWF contract expired in August. Then he would make appearances in Puerto Rico, but didn't enjoy his time there. According to Rick, he was hoping the opportunity would lead to something bigger and better, but because he had been brought in by Bret Hart and was considered a friend of his, throughout 1997, Bret was also at odds with management in the WWF and in the office. He still had Vince McMahon's phone number from when Vince originally contacted him to bring him into the company. Rick decided to give Vince a call, but as soon as he told Vince who it was calling, Vince told him to never call this number again and hung up the phone on him. Glenn Jacobs, on the other hand, still had contacts as he was originally from Memphis and still had a lot of friends who were in high places in the company and was able to get himself back into the mix and eventually into a new gimmick. He made his final appearance as Razor Ramon in WWC against Ray Gonzalez in November of 1997. In 1998, he would make his debut in New Japan Pro Wrestling, where he would join Japan's version of the NWO, until he injured his neck in 1998. Although he wrestled a couple more tours of Japan, he never felt the same after. He would finish up his in-ring career in Stampede Wrestling during its reboot in 2000. Although he made a brief return in 2012 when he appeared in CNWA Mega Expo in a tag team match. That would be his final appearance. After his wrestling career was over, Rick began a career as a motivational speaker. He would also study Eastern religion, including studying with a Buddhist monk for 4 years. On September 20th, 2019, Rick passed away in Calgary of an unexpected and sudden heart attack. He was 49 years old. That was the story of Rick Titan.
Instead of going out in the field, you take a good look in the mirror. Yeah, let's not talk about it. You've got $1 million face, but you're a part of every masquerade.
Sensational Sherri, or Sherri Martel, was born Sherri Lynn Russell in Birmingham, Alabama. Her first exposure to professional wrestling was attending the matches with her mother, originally not a fan, but would go to get out of babysitting her younger sister. Eventually growing to love the sport, by 16 she approached Grizzly Smith, who told her to come back in 5 years. After a brief marriage and having a son, she returned and began training under Butch Moore and eventually the Fabulous Moolah. In her career, she would make appearances in several promotions, but most notably in the AWA, WWF, and later WCW. Along with holding the AWA Women's Championship, she would also hold titles in the IWA and the WWF. But her role that would bring her the most recognition would be that of the manager of Randy Macho Man Savage during his run as the Macho King. Her last match was in 2005 at Wrestle Union 1, and in 2006, she would be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. In 2007, she ultimately passed away at her mother's house at the age of 49. During a time when men dominated and controlled the business, Sherri made her mark in the industry as one of the greatest female performers of all time, both as a wrestler and a manager. This is the story of Sensational Sherri Martel. Sherri Lynn Russell was born in Birmingham, Alabama on February 8, 1958. As a young child, she initially hated wrestling, but started going to TV tapings and an old cattle auction barn with her mother to get out of babysitting her younger sister, and was instantly hooked, watching stars such as Cowboy Bob Kelly, Frank Dalton, and the Stomper Archie Goldie. She was instantly in awe and always cheered for the bad guys and would dream about stepping in the ring herself. After years of going to matches with her mom, she fell in love and decided that's what she wanted to do. At 16, she approached Grizzly Smith and asked him how to get into the business, and was told it would eat her alive and to come back when she was 21. During her high school years, Sherri was a standout athlete participating in track and field and baseball. At 21, she was already married and separated and had a baby. She went back and had breakfast with Grizzly Smith and told him she still wanted to be a wrestler, as her marriage failed and she still longed to be in showbiz. She went to Butch Moore's wrestling school and spent her last $1,500. As she sat in his office telling him she wanted to be a wrestler, he came around his desk and slapped her as hard as he could. She shook it off and said, "Is that all you got?" So he signed her up. During her training, he did everything possible to try and discourage her, but nothing would stand in the way of her dreams. If anything, it just made her more determined. She learned how to take bumps and work with men. After a year of training with Butch Moore, she spent some time working in Memphis. Longing for more than just working on the independent circuit, Sherri had another breakfast meeting with Grizzly Smith, who would hook her up with the fabulous Moolah. That same day, Sherri called the veteran and took the bus to Moolah Drive to meet her. Moolah ran a training camp for women wrestlers who would live right on the property. Sherri would train every day from 7 a.m. until noon amongst the likes of Leilani Kai, Wendy Richter, and Judy Martin. Sherri would admit that was the best training at the time, but was not crazy about the 25% booking fee on all her bookings, which was to be paid to Moolah. Sherri would comment, "I started in Memphis, probably in late 1979. I was there with a small group. There was a small school there, and then I went to Moolah School to get polished up. I was there for about a year, and then I got hurt. I got my knee dislocated and quit for about 3 years. Then I went through Memphis touring and started again. Jim Cornette was my first manager." In 1980, green and scared, she made her first trip to Japan with Judy Martin. After the initial culture shock, her trip to Japan was a success and became one of many. At this time, women on the card were still considered a special attraction. Moolah changed Sherri's name to Sherri Martel when she sent her to wrestle in Japan. After her trip to Japan, she would return to the Memphis territory. This wouldn't be the break Sherri was looking for. Moolah would allege that Sherri enjoyed partying way too much and would not concentrate on her chosen career path. In the summer of 1982, she made her first handful of WWF appearances, which included appearances in Madison Square Garden, teaming with the fabulous Moolah, defeating Judy Martin and Penny Mitchell. In August of that year, she would also face Moolah in a handful of title matches for the women's title. In 1985, she went to AWA. She flew to Minneapolis from Nashville and upgraded to first class and met Stan Hansen on the plane, who put in a good word for her. Her first match in AWA was against Debbie Coombs. After a few days in Minnesota, she met with Vern Gagne and was signed to a contract. Making her on-screen debut at Superclash 1985, Sherri feuded with Candy Devine and would go on to win the AWA Women's Championship on 3 occasions. She moved to Minneapolis and was now full-time with AWA, and would have an ongoing feud with Candy Devine for most of her time in the promotion. By 1987, the AWA was in decline. Jesse Ventura, who jumped ship to the WWF, suggested Sherri speak to Vince McMahon. She was about to hit the big time in the World Wrestling Federation. Her debut on July 21, 1987 was also against Candy Devine in Fort Worth, Texas, and was announced as the AWA Women's Champion. On July 24th, she would face her former trainer, the Fabulous Moolah, in a house show in Texas, whom she would defeat to become the limits of her opponents, and it showed when Sherri apparently showed up out of ring shape. Pritchard claimed that Moolah worked stiff in the ring and attempted to blow Sherri up due to her cardio not being in peak condition. Sherri thankfully overcame the tough start to have a greater run. She turned heel shortly after, now calling herself Sensational Sherri. Through 1987, she would have several matches against Velvet McIntyre, Debbie Coombs, and Rockin' Robin. She would hold the title for 15 months, but her reign was relatively uneventful, in most part because the WWF at the time rarely televised women's matches. She would drop the belt to Rockin' Robin at a house show in Paris on October 7, 1988. Throughout this time, she would also play the role of Peggy Sue during the Honky Tonk Man's Intercontinental title reign. By 1989, WWF was starting to phase out women's wrestling. Realizing this, Sherri would transition into a full-time manager. She had briefly managed in the AWA, so did have experience at ringside. Despite being an excellent in-ring performer, this would be the role many WWF fans would remember her for. At SummerSlam 1989, Randy Savage teamed with Zeus to take on Hulk Hogan and Bruce the Barber Beefcake. Sherri would interfere for the heels. Elizabeth would make the save, attacking Sherri. As a result, Beefcake and Hogan would ultimately be victorious. After the match, Beefcake chopped off the villainous Sherri's hair to a thunderous response. In reality, this had been fake hair extensions added for the show. Shortly after SummerSlam, Savage would defeat. In April 1990, she became known as Queen Sherri and would tag with Randy Savage in a mixed tag match against Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire in WrestleMania. For the next year, she would pull double duty both as the manager of Randy Savage and face Sapphire on a regular basis, who was not a trained wrestler, but it was up to Sherri to make the matches look believable. Sapphire wore the same ring gear every night and would not shower regularly. Sherri was angry about the gear smelling bad and allegedly forced Sapphire in the women's locker room shower against her will to send a cruel message. During her 2 years with Randy Savage, when she wasn't paying for her mother's house, she spent $175,000 on wardrobes. She even witnessed Savage's rumored attention to detail during his match with the Ultimate Warrior in WrestleMania 7. At WrestleMania, the Savage and Sherri association would end when Savage lost a career-ending match with the Ultimate Warrior. After the match, Sherri attacked Savage, berating him for the defeat. Elizabeth would attack Sherri. This reunited Savage and Elizabeth, turning him face in the process. Later, she would comment on her time with Savage. "Randy, in his own way, he made me take off. He'd always tell me we were going to the airport. I looked through the world with pink sunglasses on, and I never knew what that meant until I went through a bad divorce, and he helped pull me through it. I found out what he meant by looking through the world in rose-colored glasses." Sherri would not be a free agent for long. In the summer of 1991, she started to accompany the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase to the ring. She would remain with Ted until 1992. Sherri began managing Shawn Michaels after Pat Patterson convinced Michaels to participate in the storyline. In February 1992, during Paul Bearer's interview segment The Funeral Parlor, Sherri declared she was now in love with Shawn Michaels, who had just turned on his longtime tag team partner, Marty Jannetty. Sherri seemed to relish this new role. Michaels was the egocentric younger man, while Sherri played the cougar-style character, willing to do anything for her boy toy. Sherri even sang Shawn's new theme song, Sexy Boy. In the summer of 1992, Shawn Michaels and the model Rick Martel would battle over Sherri's affections. This would culminate in a bout at SummerSlam 92, resulting in a double countout. This was a heel versus heel match that was a rarity at the time. Later that year, Sherri would be involved in a storyline where she was caught in the crossfire between Michaels and Marty Jannetty. This led to Sherri being struck by Michael's mirror. Sherri would take some time off television. It was unclear if she would be by Michael's side upon her return. Later in an interview, she would state, "I watched Sean develop from a good guy with the Rockers in the AWA to a very classic heel. I never thought in a million years that I would be managing him years later. It shows you how crazy this business is and how many changes and turns that it can take. He developed his character so well for his age, and he is one of the nicest people I have ever met in my life." The storyline, however, was cut short as Jannetty was released from the company in the midst of the feud. Sherri spent the remainder of the year aligned with Tatanka, who aided her in her feud with Luna Vachon and Bam Bam Bigelow. Sherri made her last WWF in-ring appearance on July 10, 1993 against Luna Vachon in a house show in Seattle. She was released from the World Wrestling Federation during the summer. 2 reasons had been given for Sherri's departure: her decision to enroll in cosmetology school and failing drug tests. The rumors surrounding Sherri Martel's WWF departure were confirmed by Bruce Pritchard on his podcast. Sherri was a user of marijuana when WWF started to cut down on everything that was considered a drug at the time. The refusal to stop using marijuana led Sherri opting to leave the company. Society had changed so much now that someone losing their job for weed would likely see a huge uproar against WWF, but she was a victim of the time. Towards the end of her time in the WWF, Sherri participated in a WWF invasion angle in the USWA, reuniting with Savage. Sherri would suffer a similar embarrassment to that which she had suffered at the hands of the Warrior when she ran to the ring to aid Savage in a steel cage match in Memphis against his old enemy, Jerry the King Lawler. But after accidentally knocking Savage from the ring, she had her dress yanked off by Lawler as she climbed the cage to escape. After her WWF release, Sherri had a brief run in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, siding with Tracy Smothers in a feud with Tammy Stitch, Brian Lee, as well as several intergender matches with Jim Cornette. She would also make several appearances in ECW. Sherri signed with World Championship Wrestling in 1994. The original plan was for her to manage Kevin and Dave Sullivan against Missy Hyatt and the Nasty Boys, but after Hyatt was fired in February 1994, the proposed rivalry went on with no managers for either team. She made her debut on the April 23rd edition of WCW Saturday Night under the name Sensuous Sherri. In an interview with Gene Okerlund, she said her goal was to find a man that could bring her the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. On June 24th, a title unification match took place at the Clash of Champions between WCW World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair and the WCW International World Heavyweight Champion Sting. Halloween Havoc, Sherri climbed the cage to aid Flair and in the process had her dress pulled off by Jimmy Hart, who was Hogan's manager at the time, leaving her dangling from the cage in black lingerie. WCW pitched the idea of Sherri managing a young Triple H and William Regal when the duo was experimenting as a team. Triple H's WCW stint ended before it could take off, as WWF was his ultimate goal. Sherri likely would have helped Triple H get over in the WCW instead of having it become a forgotten part of his past. Next, Sherri began managing Harlem Heat, Booker T, and Stevie Ray using the name Sister Sherri. She managed the team to 7 WCW World Tag Team Championship reigns. Booker T loved working with Sherri due to her great help managing him and Stevie Ray as Harlem Heat. WCW placed Sherri with the heel tag team to give them more momentum moving forward. Booker shared a story on his radio show about Sherri being one of the toughest people in all of WCW. Hacksaw Jim Duggan, working in a match with Harlem Heat, saw Sherri slapping him so hard that he broke character. The anger of Duggan came since the slap felt stiffer than any of the moves he was taking in the ring from Booker and Stevie. In late 1994, while still managing Harlem Heat in WCW, Sherri made a return appearance in ECW, managing Shane Douglas and Brian Pillman against Ron Simmons and Too Cold Scorpio. Back in WCW, Sherri had a brief on-screen romance with Colonel Robert Parker until October 1996 when Harlem Heat fired him and Sherri had a match with him at World War III in November. She continued to manage Harlem Heat until she got fired from the group in July of 1997 on Nitro. She was let go by WCW for showing up at work impaired at a television taping. After leaving WCW, Sherri won the IWA Mid-South Women's title, defeating Debbie Combs in August 1997. A few weeks later, she dropped the title back to Combs. On October 1999, she appeared on the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view managing George Steele in a match against Greg Valentine. Also in 1999, she was awarded the AWA Superstars Women's Championship. In 2000, she made 3 wrestling television appearances with World Championship Wrestling. The first was at the sold-out 2000 pay-per-view event, watching at ringside along with other superstars. The Chris Benoit vs. Sid Vicious matchup for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. The second was on the January 19, 2000 edition of WCW Thunder, where she had a match with Medusa, which she had lost. In her third and final appearance in World Championship Wrestling, she had a match with Mona, which she also lost. By 2003, she was living in Tennessee with her second husband, Robert Schrull, where she helped him renovate homes. Her and her husband had been living next door to her mother. Sherri had bought her mother a trailer when she was making money in wrestling. However, she had not been doing well financially and badly needed lower back surgery due to constant pain. She apparently was hoping WWE would offer to pay for her surgery during the weekend she was inducted into the Hall of Fame. She wrestled her very last match at Wrestle Union on January 29, 2005, teaming with Peggy Lee Arthur, Amber O'Neil, and Christy Vane, losing to Wendy Richter, Malia Hosaka, Bambi, and Jenny Taylor. In 2005, she took part in a World Wrestling Entertainment storyline with Shawn Michaels and Kurt Angle for WrestleMania 21. She made a return to SmackDown, singing a parody of Michaels' theme song with Angle. She was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame by Ted DiBiase in April 2006. Later that year, she worked for TNA Wrestling, taping a backstage vignette trying to offer her managerial services to free agent Bobby Roode that aired on September 21, 2006. It was her last wrestling television appearance. Reports indicated that Sherri was hoping to work more with TNA, either on screen or behind the scenes, by asking if anything was available. TNA opted against bringing her in, but one positive came from this was WWF was adding her to their Hall of Fame afterwards. On June 15, 2007, Sherri died at her mother's residence in McCalla, Alabama, near Birmingham. She was 49 years old. On September 11, 2007, investigators released a toxicology report stating that she had died of an overdose with multiple drugs in her system, including high amounts of oxycodone. She was cremated after her death. That was the story of Sensational Sherri Martel. Shannon Spruill, also known as Shannon Ward and better known as Daffney or the Queen of Scream, was a professional wrestler, manager, and actor. Most commonly known as valet, an on-screen mentally deranged girlfriend for David Flair, and would later manage both Crowbar and Flair in World Championship Wrestling from 1999 until its sale in 2001. During her run with the company, she would become the second woman ever to hold the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. Not falling into the cookie-cutter Barbie doll typical diva look and style, her character stood out, and decades later still one of the most memorable characters of the late 1990s and early 2000s. In 2003, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which she made public. From 2001 until 2013, she would bounce around the independent circuit, making appearances in Dusty Rhodes Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling Camp, Extreme Pro Wrestling, Ring of Honor, Ohio Valley Wrestling, and Anarchy Championship Wrestling. She also made a handful of appearances in TNA. She became vocal about concussions in the professional wrestling industry. In the 2017 book, Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, The History and Rise of Women's Wrestling, she was quoted as saying concussions had ended her professional wrestling career and advised other wrestlers to rest after taking a blow to the head. In September of 2021, she took her own life after appearing on a live Instagram video and reading a suicide note. Many unanswered questions still surround her death, as intensified concerns within the business over mental health rose, especially with women performers. This is the story of Shannon Spruill, aka Daffney. Shannon's parents met in England, where her father, who was in the military, was stationed. They married and moved to the Air Force Base in Germany. Her older brother was born on June 15, 1973, and Shannon was born on July 17, 1975, while living at the Air Force Base in Germany. In 1976, her family returned to the United States and initially settled in Salt Lake City. After 18 months there, they picked up and moved to Savannah, Georgia. From there, they moved to Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. She spent kindergarten and first grade at Central Elementary, then off to her mother's homeland in England, where they were stationed at Croughton Air Force Base near Oxford, and lived there for about 3 years. In 1985, she appeared in Santa Claus the Movie as a bratty kid in ballet class, which sparked her interest in acting. She was also an extra in the movie Insignificance. Throughout her childhood, she got to visit much of Europe and see where she was born. The family had only one TV station, but would watch Junkyard Dog, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, and George the Animal Steele on Saturday mornings. Her and her brother would watch and then practice slamming each other on the couch. Her father's last tour of duty was in Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, where they lived during her 5th and 6th grade years. But then, in 1987, after 21 years in the Air Force, her father retired. He got a job and the family put their roots down in Atlanta.
Sitting by my father for a million miles.
Unfamiliar with civilian life, it took her a little getting used to not living on a base. She began 7th grade with no friends and was about 2 years behind in the latest fashion trends. She played soccer at Norcross Soccer Association and started making new friends. At this point, she also started to play the cello in the middle school orchestra. She began to love playing the cello and was extremely proud of her ability and continued to play through high school. She also played junior varsity soccer at her freshman year and then moved up to varsity. At this point, soccer was a very serious career option, but it wasn't in the cards. She graduated from Norcross High School in 1993. After high school, she went to community college, taking a full load which included some music courses. She stayed living at home, working at a local indie music store called Music Drome. In 1997, she performed with rock band Shock Lobo in the Georgia Music Festival Songwriter Showcase, winning an award in the rock category. After 2 years, she transferred to Georgia State and did well enough in her studies to keep a full academic scholarship. She graduated from Georgia State University on March of 1998 with a Bachelor of Arts degree, majoring in film and video production and music and acting. Upon graduation, her GPA was 3.3. A few months before she graduated, she went to work part-time as a production coordinator at a video production company. After she graduated, she switched to full-time Monday through Friday from 8:45 to 5 p.m. It was a great experience, but she decided that she wanted to seriously pursue acting, as her previous work on Santa Claus and Insignificance had stuck with her. She went to work freelance as a teleprompter operator to free up some time during the week for auditions. She also worked as a crew member on a few independent films. In a year, she hadn't landed anything solid, just a few indie films and a couple voiceovers.
Picking up old stories on the ride.
She got a call to audition for World Championship Wrestling. She flew to Minneapolis in November of 1999 to audition for a crazy stalker chick who was going to torment David Flair. When she got there, she was asked if she was available to play a 4-week reoccurring character. She did her first pre-tape about hosting the Nitro Party and then flew home the next day. 4 weeks turned into a contract that lasted until January 2nd, 2001. On May 8th, 2000, Daffney was appointed by Vince Russo to wrestle Miss Elizabeth in her first wrestling match. On May 15th, Daffney and Crowbar defeated WCW World Cruiserweight Champion Chris Candido and his girlfriend Tammy Lynn Sitch in a mixed tag team match where Candido's Cruiserweight title was on the line. Daffney scored the pin on Tammy to make her and Crowbar the co-champions. The following week on the May 22nd episode of Nitro, Crowbar and Daffney faced one another to determine the undisputed World Cruiserweight Champion. After Candido entered the ring and hit Crowbar with a reverse piledriver, Daffney inadvertently pinned him while trying to revive him and becoming the second woman ever to hold the Cruiserweight Championship. Her reign lasted until June 7th when Lieutenant Loco pinned Disco Inferno in a 3-way title defense while Daffney was hurt following interference from Miss Hancock. Daffney's voice was an accident as she had just gotten her tonsils removed, and that's actually how her voice sounded at the time. In her first weeks with WCW, she expressed an interest in learning her newfound trade. The sports entertainment bug bit her with the mix of athleticism and performing got her. She went down to the power plant a few days a week to get schooled and to practice screaming. Crowbar and a few of the boys in the back also worked with her in the ring on TV days. One of Daffney's trademarks was a piercing scream when she was lurking at ringside. The gimmick was based on Mallory Knox, the character from the movie Natural Born Killers. She also had started to work out at Main Event Fitness, Lex Luger's gym in Marietta. Daffney's gimmicks included frequently changing hair color, t-shirts printed with bizarre slogans, and her loud screams. The latter, which was a suggestion of WCW head writer Ed Ferreira. She was released by WCW on February 2nd, 2001 due to budget cutbacks. WCW was purchased by its rival, the World Wrestling Federation, a month later.
I've been counting shadows to the beat of the radio I feel.
After she left WCW, she decided to continue her career and spent the next 8 months attending Dusty Rhodes Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling Camp in Georgia. She also worked for Extreme Pro Wrestling in 2003 as Lucy, the manager of Vic Grimes. She would also make appearances in Ring of Honor, where she debuted on April 26, 2003 as Lucy, the second valet of the Second City Saints. In July of 2003, she was signed to a developmental deal by World Wrestling Entertainment. She worked in Ohio Valley Wrestling as a manager of Aaron Stevens until she was released on December 17th of that same year. She decided to retire from professional wrestling. Intending to focus on her acting career, she sold her wrestling boots to then roommate Mickie James. While she was retired, she worked as a personal trainer. She stayed out of the business for a year and a half, taking some time off before doing a photo shoot for a pay site created by Missy Hyatt and Francine. She went to work on the indie circuit from 2006. She debuted in Women's Extreme Wrestling on April 6 under the ring name Lucy Fur, acting as a lumberjill in a match between Amy Lee and Ty Killer Weed. On June 2nd, in Irondale, Alabama, she faced El Mexico for the NWA Wrestle Birmingham Junior Heavyweight Championship, with the help of her manager Robert Fuller, who referred to Shannon as his $1 million baby. She defeated El Mexico to win her third wrestling title. In February 2007, she began making appearances with Georgia Wrestling Promotions both as manager and a referee. In April 2007, she debuted as Daffney for Shimmer Women's Athletes. She conducted an interview where she revealed her goal was to return to what she did from the beginning of her career, and that was to manage. Later that evening, she appeared as a manager of the wrestler Miss Chiff. In April 2008, she began wrestling as her Shark Girl character. However, she returned to wrestling as Daffney only after a couple of months. On the June 5, 2008 episode of TNA Impact, she appeared as a planted fan in the audience along with Amber O'Neil and Becky Bayless. The three women volunteered to wrestle Awesome Kong in a $25,000 challenge. Daffney was selected and subsequently defeated by Kong. Towards the end of 2008, she got a call from TNA to appear as the Alaskan governor and vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin in an angle between the Beautiful People and Roxy Laveau and Taylor Wilde. She portrayed the Alaska governor Sarah Palin in skits involving the Beautiful People on the January 15, 2009 episode of Impact. It was revealed by Taylor Wilde and Roxy that Sarah Palin was indeed fake. At Bound for Glory 2009, she suffered a concussion after being chokeslammed through a board wrapped in barbed wire by Abyss. 6 months later, she suffered another concussion where she was injured by Miss Betsy, an inexperienced 300-pounder in her TNA tryout match.
Like a baby when I sleep, and then you come to me.
In early 2009, she took part in the first season taping of Wrestlelicious, which started airing in March 2010, using the character of Draculetta. She debuted on March 17th in the main event of the third episode of Takedown, teaming with White Magic in a tag team match, where they lost via disqualification to the team of Lacey Von Erich and Amber Lively. On June 27, 2010, Daffney won her only women's championship, defeating Rachel Summerlin in the first round of the Anarchy Championship Wrestling's 2010 American Queen of Queens tournament.
If we can keep the fire burning till
The injuries would mean the end of Daffney's in-ring career. My career was ended early due to concussions, she said. My last match was in December 2010. I had major grade 2 concussions within a 6-month span. The first one was a brain bleed. I have made arrangements to donate my brain to science. Chris Nowinski's Sport Legacy Institute has first dibs after I expire. Anytime I hear some girl hit her head, I can say, cancel your next freaking booking. You rest. No working out. Just light walking and stretching, but no physical exertion where the blood is going to rush to your brain. Because it's dangerous, I definitely did things in my career that I wish I would have had the balls to say no to, she said. I went through barbed wire, thumbtacks, and tables. You can say that takes balls, but it takes more balls to say no. Your health is too important. She stopped wrestling in 2010 due to her injuries. Witnessing Bret Hart's career ending before her eyes when he was kicked by Goldberg, she realized her career could end in a similar way. March 15, 2011, her contract with the promotion expired and was not renewed. Shannon announced that she had filed a workers' compensation claim against TNA for injuries suffered while wrestling for the promotion, believing she had been put in an unsafe work environment. Shannon also later claimed that she did not believe she could ever wrestle again due to the accumulated injuries she had suffered during her career. TNA's head of talent relations, Terry Taylor, reneged on a promise to cover Daffney's hospital fees that stemmed from a laundry list of injuries: 3 concussions, a broken arm, a deeply bruised sternum and stinger caused by reckless in-ring stunts, and then fired her when she took the legal remedies at her disposal to force their hand.
Don't want another storm to ride.
On July 19, 2011, Shannon was arrested in Hillsborough County, Florida for driving under the influence with property damage. She pled guilty to the charges, for which she was sentenced to 1 year of probation and fined $1,580. In 2012, she was involved in a serious car accident in Florida. She credited wearing a seatbelt for having saved her life. On March 8, 2013, the lawsuit against TNA was settled out of court. Daffney had this to say about her welcome legal victory on Twitter. I'd like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank all the love and support over the past 2 years. I appreciate so much that you recognize the huge injustice that is being done to professional wrestlers throughout the industry. I hope my case has opened up a few eyes, and maybe now we, the wrestlers who put our bodies on the line every time we step into the ring, are one step closer to being provided with medical coverage and all the benefits that go along with being a true employee and not an independent contractor. Despite retiring in 2011, in July 2012 she began working as a hostess of the new Shine Wrestling promotion. She held the position until May 2013, when she returned to the role of a manager. Also in 2013, Daffney returned to Shimmer Woman Athletes at the promotion's first ever internet pay-per-view, Volume 53, where she appeared as a manager of Regeneration X. She also appeared in 2018 in Ring of Honor after a Woman of Honor World Championship tournament final between Sumi Sakai and Kelly Klein, congratulating Sakai on her victory. In 2018, Daffney made what would be her only non-archival WWE appearance when she was in the crowd and acknowledged by Mick Foley during his WWE Network stand-up special 20 Years in Hell held at Mr. Spall's Theater in Pennsylvania, which was taped on the 20th anniversary of the infamous Hell in a Cell match that took place in Pittsburgh at the Civic Arena. Shannon had surgery in January 2017 to fuse her C5 and C6 vertebrae to fix an extrusion that was pressing upon her spinal column. She subsequently wrote that neck surgery was a rite of passage for professional wrestlers. Later, Shannon became vocal about concussions in the professional wrestling industry. In the 2017 book, Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, The History and Rise of Women's Wrestling, Shannon was quoted as saying concussions had ended her professional wrestling career and advised other wrestlers to rest after taking a blow to the head. She says the effects the concussions had on her day-to-day life were obvious, such as having to cover the windows with blankets because bright lights gave her headaches. In a live stream video posted the day she died, she said, "I want the future generations to know, don't do stupid shit like me." On September 1st, 2021, Shannon streamed a live video through Instagram in which she read a suicide note, holding what appeared to be a pistol and requesting that her brain be donated for CTE testing. Fans took to social media to support Shannon, and law enforcement were dispatched to previous known addresses until her family were able to provide an updated address. Her death was announced online the following day by Shimmer wrestler Lexi Fife at Shannon's family's request. An official for the Gwinnett County, Georgia Medical Examiner's Office also confirmed her death but did not disclose the cause. A report from the police department indicated that she had died of an apparent gunshot wound to the chest. Her autopsy results were released in March 2022 and revealed that her death had been ruled a suicide, and it was also reported that her brain had been taken to the Boston University CTE Center and Brain Bank for analysis. USA Today wrote that her death intensified concerns within the business, especially among women performers, noting that wrestlers Ashley Mazzaro and Hana Kimura had also died by suicide in the preceding 2 years. Industry veterans Mick Foley and Kane included the phone number for the suicide hotline in their tweets, while Paige used the hashtag #MentalHealthMatters, and CM Punk encouraged people to ask for help. Mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. Take care of each other. Mike Johnson of Pro Wrestling Insider encouraged industry leaders to make permanent changes regarding mental health care, comparing it to WWE instituting its wellness policy after the 2005 death of Eddie Guerrero. While WWE does not provide psychological and psychiatric services for contracted performers, cheerleader Melissa pushed for other promotions to provide services for their wrestlers. A video published on September 10th revealed Shannon was cremated and a mass was held in her memory. Awesome Kong subsequently dedicated her induction into the Impact Hall of Fame to Shannon on September 18th. The following month, Impact dedicated the Monsters Ball match at Knockouts Knockdown to Shannon. That was the story of Shannon Spruill, aka Daffney.
If we can keep the fire burning till I'm coming home, then maybe I won't have the need to let the engine run. 'Cause in the morning, in the night, maybe we can hold each other tight.
Once a rising star in the world of professional wrestling, Chris Candido had it all. With impressive technical skills, he quickly made a name for himself in both WWF and ECW, and even managed to form a lifelong relationship with one of wrestling's most beloved divas. However, life took a turn for the worse when Candido's addiction issues came to light. His time in the WWF was cut short, and his relationship suffered, but Candido was determined to turn things around. He sought help for his addiction, and eventually got his life back on track. Things were looking up for Candido. He once again was back on a major national wrestling stage. He had the potential to become a top star again, and his relationship was back on solid ground. Sadly, tragedy struck when he passed away at the young age of 33, following what should have been a routine surgery. Candido's untimely death was a devastating loss for the wrestling community. He will always be remembered as a talented wrestler with an infectious personality whose life was cut short far too soon.
Are you ready to run? I am under the stairs. Just remember your clothes and the light in your hair. I'll be yours.
Christopher Barrett Candido was born March 21, 1972 in Edison, New Jersey. He was a grandson of Popeye Chuck Richards, a wrestler for the Worldwide Wrestling Federation from 1966 to 1974. He faced everyone from Don Leo Jonathan to Terry Funk, who would also wrestle Chris decades later. Funk would be one of the few men who could say he was in the ring with both a grandfather and his grandson. Chris Candido was an honor roll student as early as age 11. His passion for wrestling began when he was just a teenager in New Jersey.
Do you feel in your heart that I am your man? Do you feel in your heart that I do understand?
While attending Red Bank Catholic High School, he met and fell in love with Tammy Lynn Sitch, and the two began a lifelong relationship. In 1996, he and Jonathan Rector, who would later be known as Balls Mahoney, began receiving training from Chris's grandfather and started setting up wrestling rings. He eventually began training at Larry Sharp's Monster Factory after his grandfather hooked him up. Candido made his in-ring debut at just 14 years old in Sharp's World Wrestling Association in a benefit show for the New Jersey Multiple Sclerosis Society, along with Tony Stetson, Crusher Clink, and Bam Bam Bigelow. He continued to hone his craft over the next few years. According to CageMatch.net, Chris first appeared in May 1991 in the USWA, facing Doug Vines in his first match. He would spend the rest of 1991 in the USWA, feuding with Danny Davis for most of the time. In January of 1992, he would head to Japan, joining the FMW, now calling himself the Blue Bomber. He would return to the US in March of that year, using his real name, making several appearances in the WWA and MEWF. In 1993, Candido joined the pre-extreme ECW and worked with the Suicide Blonde stable, which caught the attention of wrestling veteran Jim Cornette. Cornette recruited Candido and his high school sweetheart Tammy Sitch to join his Smoky Mountain Wrestling promotion, where she became his manager. Chris went on to win several titles during his time in SMW and even captured the NWA World Championship after Shane Douglas vacated the belt when ECW broke away. Through 1993 and 1994, he would spend in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, feuding with Tim Horner, and also forming a short-lived tag team with Brian Lee. In October of 1994, he would make another trip to Japan, this time appearing in All Japan Pro Wrestling. In 1994, Sitch was contacted by the WWF, and she began appearing as Tamara Murphy, a commentator for live event news segments during syndicated WWF television shows. After a successful run in SMW, Candido made his WWF debut in May of 1995. World Wrestling Federation gave Candido the ring name Skip and paired him with Sitch, who was renamed Sunny. The duo portrayed a fitness guru tandem who often mocked other wrestlers for being out of shape. His first WWF match was on Superstars against Scott Taylor, and would have several matches against Barry Horowitz. On July 25th, he would face an upset and suffer a defeat from Horowitz on Superstars during a 10-minute challenge. By September of 1995, he would be used mainly to put over other talent, from Hakushi to Fatu and even Marty Jannetty. Chris became frustrated with where he was going in the company and falling lower on the roster, even losing to Perry Horowitz again. On December 19th, he would make his first appearance tagging with Tom Pritchard, who was renamed Zip, as the Body Donnas with Sonny as their manager. This partnership led to Sonny becoming one of the biggest stars in the WWF, and in 1996, she even won PWI's Manager of the Year award. They would have several chances at the tag team titles against the Smoking Guns, and would eventually capture the titles in a tag team tournament on March 31st, 1996. They would lose the titles to the Godwins, and Sonny would turn on them. However, their success in the WWF was short-lived. By September 1996, the Federation was going in a different direction and straying away from gimmicks like the Body Donnas. They would have their last match as a team on the September 23rd edition of WWF Raw, losing to Owen Hart and the British Bulldog. Reports of Sonny cheating on Chris with multiple wrestlers strained their marriage, and they both began experimenting with more drugs. This is a time when Chris's life began falling apart. Sonny's career would take a different path. Sitch claimed that, in 1997, Playboy had approached her and offered a six-figure sum to pose nude for the magazine. Tammy stated she declined the offer, because she didn't feel she was emotionally ready to take on a project like that. Rena Sable Merrow, with whom Tammy had real-life animosity, later disputed her claim that she was approached for a possible photo shoot. From 2000 to 2003, however, Sonny regularly posed nude for Missy Hyatt's adult website, Wrestling Vixens. In years later, she said she regretted taking part in the website due to the money she claimed she never received, as well as the sexual actions some of the other models performed in their own photo and video shoots. During her 3 years with the WWF, she would have relationships with Shawn Michaels and claims a British Bulldog as well. But Davey Boy Smith's daughter, Georgia, has denied it ever happened, and responded to Tammy Sitch's affair claims via Twitter. I have been contacted/tweeted about the whole Sonny affair regarding my dad. I don't want to give this topic any attention, but that is complete lies, and with what my brother, my mother, and what my family have been through, she should have more respect, she wrote. Also, I don't know what she gets out of boasting / bragging about sleeping with thousands of wrestlers. That's pretty sad / pathetic. She continued, "Don't worry, I'm not letting it get to me, but I am aware of her comments and she's got problems and likes attention." Ahmed Johnson would also claim to having a brief affair with Tammy, but she denied it in several interviews. And later, it was rumored that she had encounters with Raven, Dolph Ziggler, and Chris Masters. When Bruce Pritchard was questioned about Tammy's cheating, he would state, "The fact that he did nothing, people got to the point where they stopped feeling sorry for him and were kind of like, okay, dumbs, if you're not going to do anything, we're going to let this little girl run over you and do shit in your face. Then you don't deserve anybody to feel bad for you because you're letting it happen and you're not doing anything about it." During an interview with That's Wrestling, Justin Credible would state, "My experience, and I know Sean was with her. And Chris did know. I love Chris. Chris was a guy that helped me get into ECW. Chris was always a good friend. So one time we were in some town, and they had Sean Waltman and Billy Gunn watching Candido's match as Skip, and I think Tom Pritchard was there too. But whatever, that doesn't matter. But Shawn Michaels would sneak into Sunny's locker room because back then she was the only one on the road. So the women's locker room was strictly for Sunny. So Shawn would go in there and do his business. So they would watch out, and when the match was over, they would come and knock on the door. So one day she was wearing a very puffy, yet like something you would put this way. Shawn had a beard at the time. Literally shit would stick to his face from the sweater. They warned Shawn that he's coming through the curtain, and Shawn literally runs into Chris like crisscrossing Candido with white shit all over his face from her sweater, like literally, and goes like this. "Oh, sorry, kid." I gotta give him a sportsman slap in the ass, and runs off with all the white shit all over his face. Like, really, dude? You didn't catch that whole thing? So yeah, that's one story I have. But Shia was bad, man. She was real bad. She tried to have sex with me. Well, when I stayed with them back in the day, we would travel together. And one day, they stayed at my mom and dad's house, and we were doing house shows, and they returned the favor. I was staying with them at Tammy's mom's house, and when Chris was in the shower, Tammy came up to me with a towel on, and I was sleeping on the floor, and she took the thing off and said, "F me right here." And being that I'm at my friend's house, I played it off like it was a joke, like she was ribbing, and I put the covers over my head. I'm like, "Stop, leave me alone, ha ha ha." She was dead ass serious, bro. I wouldn't do that to a friend, Invite me into your house to do that, it's just dirty. Sorry, nobody's that good looking, dude. And she was just like that. She was a bad human. And everyone's always like Chris Candido was the sweetest man in the world. In a revealing interview, Chris Candido's brother Johnny spoke about their time in the WWF and how it led to increased drug abuse. Johnny was just in the 8th grade when they joined the WWF, but he witnessed disturbing things happening with his brother and Sonny. Johnny shared that he felt things needed to change quickly, as he feared his brother might end up dead. By 1996, Chris had left WWF and joined ECW, which marked a fresh start for him. While Sonny only made limited appearances in ECW, Candido made himself a part of Shane Douglas' Triple Threat faction with Bam Bam Bigelow. Sitch then began acting as host for several WWF television shows, including Livewire, Shotgun Saturday Night. In addition, she appeared on MTV Singled Out and Entertainment Tonight. Candido began wrestling as Chris Candido for ECW, where he formed a stable called the Suicide Blondes with Johnny Hotbody and Chris Michaels. Wrestling under the Freebird rule, the Suicide Blondes trio had 2 stints as the ECW Tag Team Champions in April and May 1993, first defeating Tony Stetson and Larry Winters, and then losing the titles to the Super Destroyers, only to regain them the same evening. They vacated the ECW Tag Team Championship in July 1993 when Candido left the promotion. He also had a long tag team title reign with Lance Storm before leaving ECW after 3 years. In 1998, Sonny became a babyface and briefly became the manager of the Legion of Doom 2000, leading them to win a tag team championship #1 contender battle royal at WrestleMania. Sonny would continue to manage them until she was released in July 1998 amid rumors and backstage problems with Rena Sable Marrow and an addiction to painkillers, and topping it off by no-showing several appearances. After being released by the WWF in 1998, Tammy joined ECW. She made her debut at Heatwave 4 days after her WWF release. Now billed as Tammy Lynn Sitch, she assisted Candido in his win over Lance Storm and their subsequent feud. By September, Storm introduced his own valet, a parody of Sitch, Tammy Lynn Bitch, played by Dawn Marie. Later that year, amid more rumors of drug use, Tammy and Chris took some time off of television. When the duo returned, Candido realigned with Shane Douglas' Triple Threat, and Tammy began a feud with Douglas manager Francine. The feud was cut short when Sitch was arrested after violating a restraining order filed by her mother. After a brief tour of Australia, she returned in October 1999 on an episode of ECW on TNN, where she talked openly about her past drug issues and recovery. Candido and Sitch left the promotion in December 1999. The duo went to work in WCW briefly in 2000. Candido debuted in March of that year, and Sitch debuted 1 month later at Spring Stampede, helping him win the WCW Cruiserweight Championship and a match against the artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea. She then feuded with Iakea's valet Paisley. The short-lived feud came to a conclusion at Slamboree when the artist and Paisley stripped Sitch's dress off to reveal her undergarments after Candido defeated the artist in a singles match. Sitch and Candido then briefly feuded with Crowbar and Daffney. Candido later dropped the title, which marked the end of the couple's run with the company. As in the past, Sitch's departure was surrounded by rumors of drug abuse. After being released from WCW, the duo landed in Extreme Pro Wrestling, where she managed Candido to a title once again. Candido and Sitch parted ways with XPW and started touring other independent wrestling promotions, and in the spring of 2003, they moved to Puerto Rico and were set to work for International Wrestling Association. But Sabu convinced them to work for rival World Wrestling Council instead. After 6 months, the couple quit the promotion and headed back to the States. Upon their return to the States, they briefly lived with former ECW wrestler Hack Myers in his home in Florida. According to Johnny, Chris Candido was doing more and more drugs to block out the idea that Sonny was cheating on him. He desperately didn't want to believe it because he would come home every night and he literally had his unconditional love for her, Johnny said. He was so nice and naive, he would believe anything she told him. According to reports, Chris managed to regain control over his life. In a fortunate turn of events, he was given another opportunity to showcase his wrestling skills on a grand platform after signing with TNA Wrestling in 2005. In January, Candido made his debut in Total Non-Stop Action Wrestling, where he faced AJ Styles, but unfortunately came up short. He had the privilege of collaborating with renowned stars such as AJ Styles, Dustin Rhodes, and Diamond Dallas Page. Candido's promising ascent took a tragic turn when he suffered a leg fracture during a tag team match at Lockdown 2005, causing his dreams to also come crashing down. On the March 18th episode of Impact, Candido, alongside the Naturals, faced defeat against Dustin Rhodes and America's Most Wanted. Candido's final appearance occurred at Lockdown, where he and Lance Hoyt unsuccessfully battled Apollo and Sonny Siaki. Tragically, during the match, Candido's leg broke when Siaki inadvertently landed on it after executing a flying dropkick early on. Despite the injury, TNA kept him involved in storylines, even orchestrating his wheelchair-assisted appearance to aid the Naturals in winning the tag titles. Candido's last recorded performance was scheduled to be aired later that week. However, the episode ultimately aired after his untimely passing. Following his injury, Chris Candido, at the age of 33, underwent a surgical procedure to have titanium plates and screws implanted in his legs. Unfortunately, on April 28, 2005, Candido began feeling unwell and his condition progressively worsened throughout the day. Eventually, he collapsed in the evening, prompting immediate transportation to Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital in New Brunswick, New Jersey. During his recovery, he encountered the development of a blood clot in his leg. While many attribute his death to the blood clot, his brother Johnny stated that the autopsy revealed the cause of death was to be acute pneumonia, which was brought on by the use of a sleep aid he had received against medical advice. Candido's lungs reportedly filled with fluid, ultimately resulting in his passing while in the process of recuperating from his surgery. In tribute to his memory, TNA honored Candido by holding a tag team tournament in his name. Additionally, in 2009, he was posthumously inducted into the Hardcore Hall of Fame. Irrespective of the obstacles encountered, Chris Candido's legacy endures that of a remarkably talented wrestler who exuded an unwavering passion for the sport. In the course of his career, Chris Candido held several championships, such as the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, WWF World Tag Team Championship, ECW World Tag Team Championship, and WCW Cruiserweight Championship. At the time of his passing, he was the reigning NWA Midwest Heavyweight Champion. That was the story of Chris Candido.
Are you ready to run? I am under the stairs. Just remember your clothes and the light in your hair. I'll be over the hills in a minute or so.
Mike Lockwood, also known as Crash Holly. Mike was born in Anaheim, California in 1971 and raised in Pacifica, where he graduated from Terra Nova High School. He became interested in professional wrestling in the 8th grade, inspired by Brady Boone. Mike decided he wanted to wrestle while in junior high, while stocking shelves at a local liquor store. At 16, he called Buzz Sawyer's wrestling school after seeing an ad on TV.
I'm Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer. Do you got what it takes? Do you got the heart, the desire, the determination, the charisma to become a professional wrestler? Then if you do, I took time out of my busy schedule, out of my worldwide tour, to come here to Sacramento, California, and have the biggest training camp in the United States. If you got what it takes to become a pro wrestler, I want you to call right now.
But was told he was too young. In 1989, he graduated from Terra Nova, unbeaten as a senior on the wrestling team. After graduation, he called Woody Farmer and signed up for his wrestling school in Hayward, California, which was also run by Mae Young and Pepper Gomez, paying an entry fee of $2,000. Mike would officially start training in 1989. Just after 6 months of training, he debuted in Bay Area Wrestling, which aired on the Sports Channel as Johnny Pearson, where he stayed until 1994. His first match was against Boris Gibbanoff. After dislocating his shoulder 5 times, which required surgery, he took 18 months off to recover. Throughout his whole career with Bay Area Wrestling, he was only paid $30 the entire time. When he decided to return, Woody was only running sporadic shows and now owned a piano moving business. He then wrestled on the independent circle as Irish Aaron O'Grady. He would start working for Paul Brown, who ran shows every few months and eventually became connected with Mike Modest. In 1996, he joined All Pro Wrestling, owned by Roland Alexander, where he became known as the Leprechaun Aaron O'Grady and had several matches with Vic Grimes. In 1997, he made a return to the Terra Nova High School gym as the Leprechaun during an independent spot show. His first match back, he was wrestling Matt Heisman, who would later gain fame as Spike Dudley. Mike trained with Spike and had many matches together over the years. Some of his best matches were with Vic Grimes, which got him his tryout with the WWF after Jim Cornette saw the tape of one of their matches. He would regularly use a crossbody off the top balcony. After viewing a tape of a match between Mike and Mike Modest, Extreme Championship wrestler Taz referred Mike to ECW owner Paul Heyman. Mike was still known as Aaron O'Grady and lost 4 untelevised matches in ECW in November 1997, including a dark match at November to Remember. Living in his dad's motorhome and helping out with the ring crew, he got into a disagreement with Taz, who was known to be hard on the newer talent. Mike ended up leaving ECW as he knew his WWF tryout was right around the corner. He went back to All Pro Wrestling in California and would even do a Taz impersonation. Mike got his tryout match in the WWF with Vic Grimes, and immediately after the match, both Mike and Vic Grimes were signed to a developmental deal. They were sent back to Memphis to learn how to put together a TV match and where the cameras were. Once in Memphis, he worked in Power Pro Wrestling for more training and even went to Mexico for 3 months. He wrestled in Monterrey under a mask as a Green Ghost and performed at the Super Astros show. He claimed after living in Mexico for 3 months, he still didn't speak a word of Spanish. Even though he didn't know Spanish, he still felt he was getting heat in the locker room. Not having a work visa and routinely getting stiffed in the ring, he felt his safety was in jeopardy and was sent back to Memphis. Mike claimed he enjoyed his time in Memphis, but admitted it was nerve-wracking not knowing from 1 week to the next if he would be called up to the main roster or fired, and regretted never being able to work with Jerry Lawler. Around that time, WWF was bringing in Mike Tyson for WrestleMania. Once a week, him, Sean Stasiak, and A-Train would drive up north to Louisville to work for Danny Davis to do his television taping, as well as a shot show at the Louisville Gardens. After getting a call from Bruce Pritchard and explaining the storyline where Bob Holly was pretending he was 400 pounds, he offered a spot as Bob's cousin, Crash, and was told to dye his hair. He was flown out to Buffalo and had a dark match with Kurt Angle. That impressed the office. Next week in Milwaukee, on August 6, 1999, he made his debut on TV as Crash Holly, conceived by Vince Russo. They became known as the Holly Cousins. Their relationship was a strained one, and Hardcore frequently threatened Crash. When they took the gimmick of claiming to be super heavyweights, over 400 pounds each, Crash would carry a scale to ringside to weigh in before matches. At first, Bob Holly wasn't excited about getting a kayfabe cousin, and even told Mike to his face he didn't know him and didn't like him or the idea. Eventually, after a couple of weeks, Mike earned Bob's respect. Once Vince McMahon told Bob how much he enjoyed the angle and the chemistry between the two. After a very short time, they won the tag team titles on the October 24th edition of Raw's War. They defeated the Rock and Sock Connection for the titles. They would hold the championship until the November 4th edition of SmackDown, when they lost it to Mankind and his new partner, Al Snow. According to Mike, no matter how hard Bob hit him, he went in the back and shook his hand after and thanked him. Mike met his wife, Nikki Wheeler, when she escorted Mark Henry to the ring at Unforgiven 1999 in Charlotte, North Carolina. They married on New Year's Eve of that year. In early 2000, Crash Holly joined the Hardcore division. On the February 24th edition of SmackDown, he defeated Test to begin his first of 22 Hardcore Championship reigns. He decreed that he must defend the championship 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which later became known as the 24/7 rule. This meant that the title was permanently contested, not just in sanctioned matches, and could change hands anywhere, anytime anyone pinned the champion, so long as the WWF referee counted the fall. Holly was frequently attacked by other wrestlers in unlikely locations, including an airport, a funhouse, a circus, and his hotel rooms. Although he was often pinned, he usually immediately regained the title. His most common tactic was to sneak a pin often after the champion had been beaten down by somebody else, and quickly run backstage away from all possible challengers. This turned him into a crowd favorite and earned him the nickname the Houdini of Hardcore. He frequently defended the championship against non-wrestlers, including referees and road agents like Gerald Briscoe and Pat Patterson. He had a long feud with the Mean Street Posse, Pete Gas, Rodney, and Joey Abs over the title. He even lost and quickly regained the title against one of the Godfather's hoes. At Rebellion, Crash defeated William Regal to win the European Championship. He lost the title to Regal 2 days later. In late 2000, another of Crash's storyline cousins, Molly Holly, was introduced. In 2001, the Holly cousins feuded with the Dudley Boys. In the course of this feud, at the suggestion of Mike, Molly began a romantic relationship with Spike Dudley, leading to internal disputes within each family, as well as a Romeo-Juliet-style angle between the six of them. On the March 18, 2001 episode of Heat, Crash defeated Dean Malenko to win the Light Heavyweight Championship. He defended it on 2 episodes of Heat against Funaki and Grandmaster Sexy before dropping it to the debuting Jerry Lynn on the April 29th episode. In May 2001, Holly and Crash briefly reunited as a lower card team. In 2002, he opened Crash Holly's School of Professional Wrestling in Salisbury, North Carolina, where his wife Nikki grew up. When the WWF was renamed World Wrestling Entertainment and divided into the Raw and SmackDown brands, Mike was assigned to the Raw roster, where he had little success. He jumped ship to SmackDown on the September 2, 2002 episode of Raw during a match with Jeff Hardy. Earlier, Raw general manager Eric Bischoff was informed that a Raw wrestler would leave to reunite with a relative on SmackDown. On his first SmackDown match on September 5th, he defeated the Hurricane. He then feuded with Cruiserweight champion Jamie Noble. On the October 3rd SmackDown, Noble defeated Crash to regain the title. On December 19th, Crash teamed with Bill DeMott to defeat Noble and Nunzio. After the match, DeMott turned on Crash and attacked him. This led to a match on the next SmackDown, which DeMott won. After being sidelined for 4 months, Crash returned on the April 24, 2003 edition of SmackDown. He soon joined Matt Hardy and Shannon Moore in the Mattitude Followers, which was abbreviated to the MFers stable. As Crash was Moore's alleged apprentice, Hardy also referred to him as a Moore-on. His last several matches with the company were tag team matches with Moore, as well as house show matches against newcomer Orlando Jordan. On June 30th, 2003, Mike was released from the WWE. Mike's release was mutual, as he didn't understand what direction the company was going and wanted to pursue other things, and admittedly was personally a lot happier leaving. Mike signed a contract with NWA Total Nonstop Action, later known as Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, in July 2003 and debuted as Mad Mikey, accepting an open challenge from Elix Skipper and losing the match. Mad Mikey was angry at many things, on which he elaborated on in promos. He wrestled on 9 NWA TNA weekly pay-per-views, lastly on October the 1st. He briefly wrestled for Pro Wrestling Iron in Hayward, California. In late 2003, Mad Mikey and Rory Fox defeated Quentin Lee and the Human Time Bomb with Ricky Steamboat as a special guest referee for Heartland Wrestling Association in what turned out to be Mike's final match. He was reportedly in negotiations with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Mike passed away on November 6, 2003 at his friend Stevie Richards' house in Florida. He was 32 years old. He was found in a pool of vomit around his face. Empty bottles of prescription drugs and a partially consumed bottle of alcohol were found nearby. He had recently received divorce papers from his estranged wife. His death, caused by choking on his own vomit, was officially ruled a suicide. He was buried in China Grove in Rowan County, North Carolina. In August of 2005, Nora Greenwald, who performed alongside Mike as Molly Holly, released a DVD titled Nora Greenwald Shootin' the Crap, and a portion of the profits from the sale of the DVD went to Mike's daughter's education fund. He stated he loved doing comedy angles, and a lot of people to this day would agree Mike was one of the greatest hardcore champions, not because of his offense, but the way he could take a beating. One of his favorite title defenses was in the Newark Airport and in the arcade with the Headbangers. He believed his best overall matches were with Dean Malenko. Mike was a huge music and wrestling fan, and his favorite singer was Elvis. Bob Holly would state in an interview, he was very vocal about a lot of things, but a blast to be around. That was the story of Mike Lockwood, aka Crash Holly. Nikolai Volkoff was a professional wrestler who debuted in the 1960s and performed up until his passing in 2018. Born Josip Peruzovic in Yugoslavia on October 14, 1947, he immigrated to Canada after a weightlifting tournament in Vienna in the late 1960s. Standing 6'4" and weighing over 300 pounds, he caught the attention of Calgary promoter Stu Hart and made his debut in Stampede Wrestling in 1967. Throughout his career, he wrestled under various names such as Beeple Mongol, Boris Brezhnev, and most famously Nikolai Volkoff. He performed in almost every major promotion during his career while being billed as a Russian from the Soviet Union and singing the Soviet national anthem before every match, usually being drowned out by boos and on several occasions being attacked by his opponent before even finishing singing. One of the staples of the World Wrestling Federation's national expansion during the 1980s with his tag team partner the Iron Sheik, and was co-holder of the tag team titles on multiple occasions. This is the untold story of Josip Peruzovic, aka Nikolai Volkoff. Josip grew up in the Socialist Republic of Croatia, which was then part of Yugoslavia. His father was Croatian and his mother was Russian. His maternal grandfather, Ante Tomasevic, was world champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at the turn of the 20th century. His brother is Croatian footballer Luka Peruzovic, who played for Yugoslavia in the 1974 World Cup. In 1967, Josip slipped away one night from his Yugoslavian weightlifting team during a tournament in Vienna. He walked into the Canadian embassy and defected from behind the Iron Curtain. It was an easy choice, he recalled years later, remembering how he studied philosophy as a teenager in Croatia and decided he was not destined to live under a communist regime. He ended up in Canada, landing in Calgary, and after watching Stampede Wrestling on TV, found his way to Stu Hart's dungeon and began his professional wrestling career. He met Canadian wrestler Newton Tatry, also known as Jito Mongol. Tatry took Josip under his wing as a protege, and alongside Stu Hart trained the non-English-speaking 350-pound man to become a professional wrestler. They would become a tag team as he began using the name Beepole Mongol. They made their way to North Bay, Ontario for a few months. Later, the Mongols were brought to the United States in 1968 and began being managed by Tony Angelo and later Lou Albano. In 1970, he faced Bruno Sammartino in Madison Square Gardens to a sold-out crowd. They captured the WWF International Tag Team Championship from Tony Marino and Victor Rivera on June 15, 1970. After losing the title to Luke Graham and Tarzan Tyler in a match over a year later that unified the WWF International and WWF World Tag Team Championship. After getting married and having a family, Josip decided to move on to becoming a singles wrestler, mainly because of the haircut he was forced to wear to fit the Mongol character. Bill Eadie would fill his role on the Mongol tag team. Josip made his way to Texas to work for Fritz von Erich in WCCW, who was impressed by Josip's muscular build, as most big men in that day were mostly fat. In 1974, he moved to the AWA, where he wrestled under the name Boris Brzezinkov, managed by Bobby the Brain Heenan. He used the same gimmick with a different ring name. He would return to the Worldwide Wrestling Federation by the end of 1974, now known as Nikolai Volkoff, and feud with Bruno Sammartino, selling out Madison Square Garden several times. He would have ongoing feuds with Pedro Morales, Chief Jay Strongbow, and Gorilla Monsoon. In 1976, he made a one-off appearance as a masked executioner as he became the third member along with Killer Kowalski and Big John Studd. They captured the World Tag Team Championship, but it was vacated due to a third member interfering. During this time in the WWF, Nikolai was announced as being from Mongolia. In 1977, he began what would be several tours in Japan for New Japan Pro Wrestling and All Japan Pro Wrestling, but still returning to the WWF and continue his feud with Bruno Sammartino as well as the likes of SD Jones. In 1983, while doing sporadic tours of Japan, Nikolai wrestled for Cowboy Bill Watts in the Mid-South region and began partnering with a young Barry Darsow, who was known as Crusher Darsow, a turncoat American who is now a Soviet sympathizer, feuding with both Jim Duggan and the Junkyard Dog. He made brief appearances in Florida Championship Wrestling, and while facing Manny Fernandez, the battle turned into a real fight when Fernandez showed up for their match drunk and began working stiff. Nikolai asked that Fernandez ease up several times, and when Fernandez didn't oblige, he was legitimately knocked out by several punches from Nikolai, as Nikolai was also a semi-professional boxer aside from being a pro wrestler. In July 1984, Nikolai returned to the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, now named WWF, and the next month defeating SD Jones on Georgia Championship Wrestling, when Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation took over the time slot on Superstation WTBS. That same year, Vince McMahon decided to team him up with former world champion the Iron Sheik, who had just lost the title earlier that year to Hulk Hogan. He began singing his rendition of the Soviet national anthem, and they became one of the most despised teams of that time. Originally, he was going to play the song from a cassette tape, but it got lost before the match, so Nikolai got on the microphone and claimed the Junkyard Dog stole it, and he would sing it instead. He claimed that was the only time he was ever nervous in the ring. From that point on, he sang before every match. The team became managed by Classy Freddie Blassie. They won the World Tag Team Championship from the US Express, Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo at the first WrestleMania at Madison Square Garden, when Sheik had knocked out Windham from behind with Blassie's cane. Part of the pair's regular entrance consisted of waving the flags of Iran and the Soviet Union, then demanding that the crowd be quiet and show respect, while Volkoff sang the Soviet national anthem, a demand that usually only attracted boos from the usually pro-American crowds. Sheik then usually grabbed the mic and said, "Iran number 1, Russia number 1, USA Hakpui," which was followed by a simulated spitting act. It was all designed to get major heat from the crowd, which turned out to be a successful formula. On May 11, 1985, at the first Saturday night's main event, Sheik, Volkoff, and George Steele were defeated by the team of Wyndham Rotundo and Ricky Steamboat. Wyndham and Rotundo would win back the titles from Sheik and Volkoff. After losing the titles back to Rotundo and Wyndham, Nikolai began to wrestle more in singles competition. He faced Hulk Hogan for the WWF World Heavyweight Championship on several occasions in 1985 and 1986, including a flag match on Saturday night's main event at the Brendan Byrne Arena. Nikolai also feuded with former 82nd Airborne paratrooper Corporal Kirshner through 1985 and 86, defeating him in a peace match on Saturday night's main event. Their feud ended when Kirshner used Blassie's cane to defeat Volkoff at WrestleMania 2 in another flag match during the Chicago portion of the event. In the fall of 1986, Volkoff's manager Classy Freddie Blassie sold half interest in his stable of superstars to the Doctor of Style Slick, as the aging Blassie was taking a step back from the business. This was a storyline aimed at reducing Blassie's active role, and the Hollywood fashion plate eventually retired in the fall of 1986 at the age of 68. Sheik and Volkoff feuded with WWF newcomer Jim Duggan for the majority of 1987, including Duggan running into the ring and stopping the Russian singing before their match against the Killer Bees at WrestleMania 3. Sheik and Volkoff won by disqualification when Duggan entered the ring while chasing Volkoff and then hitting Sheik with his 2x4 while he had the camel clutch on jumping Jim Brunzell. After WrestleMania 3, Sheik and Volkoff began a feud with Duggan, who would often run down to the ring and attack Volkoff and Sheik. This occurred on an episode of Saturday night's main event when the Can-Am Connection wrestled and defeated Sheik and Volkoff after Duggan, who was sitting in the front row of the audience, interfered due to the cheating of Sheik, Volkoff, and Slick. Sheik and Volkoff were forced to disband when Sheik and Duggan were pulled over by New Jersey State Police on their way to a WWF event. Even though Sheik and Duggan were feuding on screen, they were not in real life. Officers suspected Duggan of DUI. After a search of the vehicle and the persons, police discovered that Duggan was under the influence of marijuana while Sheik was high on cocaine. Small amounts of cocaine were also found in the vehicle. Duggan received a conditional release while Sheik was placed on probation for a year. The scandal that erupted after the two in-ring enemies were found drinking and doing drugs together led to the end of the angle, Sheik's release, and Duggan's temporary departure from the WWF. Nikolai and the Sheik were completely opposite when it came to traveling on the road, as Sheik liked to party while Nikolai liked to save his money and go back to his room every night early and get a good night's sleep. After Sheik was fired, Slick replaced him with Boris Zukov, another alleged Russian, to form the Bolsheviks. They feuded with WWF newcomers Powers of Pain, losing to them at the inaugural SummerSlam pay-per-view in 1988. But unfortunately, the Bolsheviks did not gain the level of success as did the partnership with the Iron Sheik, as they lost most of their matches and eventually Slick as their manager. Nikolai was also responsible for reconnecting Freddie Blassie with his daughter that he had not seen in years. When Russia fell and communism died, Nikolai decided he no longer wanted to be a heel and stopped singing the Soviet national anthem and began singing the U.S. national anthem and became very pro-West, which led to a feud with Sergeant Slaughter, who had an Iraqi sympathizer role and teamed with the former Iron Sheik, who had recently become an Iraqi under the name Colonel Mustafa. After Nikolai's team defeated Slaughter's team at the 1990 Survivor Series with Tito Santana as the sole survivor, Nikolai left the WWF at the end of 1990. He made a brief return to compete in 1992 at the Royal Rumble match, as well as to face Hercules in a house show. After leaving WWF, Volkoff began competing on the independent circuit. On May 3, 1991, he defeated his former Bolshevik partner Boris Zukov for the Trans World Wrestling Federation in Newington, Connecticut. In 1992, he went to Eastern Championship Wrestling in Philadelphia, where he feuded with Vladimir Markov. On August 8th, he went to Puerto Rico to wrestle for World Wrestling Council WCC 19th anniversary show, losing to the Patriot. On October 2nd, he lost to ECW champion Don Morocco. On April 4th, 1993, he wrestled his former partner, the Iron Sheik, to a double countout at a Wrestling in the USA event in Livingston, New Jersey. He then returned to ECW on October 16th, 1993, and lost to Jimmy Snuka. He returned as a babyface to pin Barry Horowitz at WWF Superstars All-American Wrestling taping on July 6, 1993. On February 1, 1994, Nikolai began a full-time return to the WWF, making a ringside appearance at a Superstars taping in White Plains, New York, during a match between Diesel and Mike Moraldo. For the next 2 months, Volkoff was shown in the crowd, until eventually he became a sympathetic heel, playing the whipping boy of Ted DiBiase's $1 Million Corporation. In the storyline, Nikolai had fallen on hard times and was forced to take a job working for DiBiase and his new corporation. As a low man in the group, he was forced to wrestle matches no one else wanted, or sent out to soften up opponents for other members of the stable as a sacrificial lamb of the group. The disrespect even extended to renaming him Nickel and Dime Volkoff, and DiBiase forcing him to place a cent sign on his trunks where the Russian sickle once was, along with a sign on his ring attire that read "Property of the $1 Million Man." The final WWF match for Nikolai was on December 30th, 1994, when he defeated Bob Starr in a house show. Nikolai's final appearance in the WWF was at the Boston Garden on May 13, 1995. During a match between Bam Bam Bigelow and Tatanka, Nikolai made an appearance to chase Tatanka's manager, Ted DiBiase, away. He made a brief cameo on an episode of Shotgun Saturday Night in 1997, where Todd Pettingale discovered him homeless sleeping in a box on the streets of New York City. He also appeared at WrestleMania 17 at the Astrodome in Houston in the Gimmick Battle Royal, which was won by the Iron Sheik. On November 30th, 2001, he lost to King Kong Bundy at an AAWA event in Jersey City, New Jersey. On February 3rd, 2005, Nikolai was announced as one of the WWF Hall of Fame inductees for the class of 2005. He was inducted on April 2nd of that year by Jim Ross in Los Angeles. In 2006, Nikolai took part in the World Wrestling Legends pay-per-view, The Reunion. Managed by the Iron Sheik, he wrestled a match against Duggan. Before the match, he once again sang the national anthem of the Soviet Union and riled up the crowd. Nikolai made his first appearance on WWE television in over 2 years on the August 13th, 2007 episode of Raw as a contestant on WWE Idol, a parody of American Idol. Nikolai appeared alongside the Iron Sheik and Howard Finkel, although Nikolai was the only one who sang. Nikolai sang the Soviet national anthem, receiving boos from the crowd, despite being a babyface, and was insulted by Judge William Regal, although Judges Mick Foley and Maria both praised the performance. In response, the Sheik, who was also insulted, went on a tirade until both he and Nikolai were escorted out of the building by security. Nikolai worked with the Baltimore County Police Athletic League Kids program, and he previously worked as a code enforcement officer in Baltimore City. Nikolai passed away at his home on July 29, 2018, at the age of 70, days after being released from the hospital in Maryland, where he had been treated for dehydration and other medical issues. That was the untold story of Josip Peruzovic, a.k.a. Nikolai Volkoff.
Союз душевных республик свободных владела навеки великая Русь. Да здравствует свободный и вольный народ, ныне побужденный Советский Союз.
Tiny Lister was an actor and part-time professional wrestler also known as Zeus and later Z-Gangsta. His on-screen feud with Hulk Hogan starting in the No Holds Barred movie and boiled over into a main event match at SummerSlam 1989, where he teamed up with Randy Macho Man Savage and faced Hulk Hogan along with his partner Brutus Beefcake. Despite being blind in one eye, in 1982 he was NCAA 2 Division Shot Put champion and also played multiple exhibition games in the short-lived United States Football League, but decided to pursue a career in acting instead, which spanned over 4 decades and accumulated more than 200 acting credits. Despite his massive size and intimidating appearance, he was known to be humble and down-to-earth and a devoted Christian. One of the few actors who crossed over into the world of professional wrestling who didn't leave a bad taste in the mouth of loyal fans. This is the untold story of Tiny Lister, aka Zeus. Born Tommy Lister in Compton, California on June 24, 1958, the second of 4 children, and later became known as Tiny due to his massive physique, standing 6'5" and weighing over 300 pounds. He was born with a deformed detached retina in his right eye, causing permanent blindness. Tiny grew up in Compton, California, which at the time was filled with drugs, gangs, and violence, but he chose to break the curse of his generation at an early age. He stayed away from gang life, choosing instead to stay home and watch westerns. He chose religion over wrongdoing. He also developed an interest in films and television early in life. His grandmother, Rosie Lister, was Lucille Ball's maid for over a decade. Tiny attended school at Enterprise Junior High School and later Compton High School, where he began competing in track and field, which was his first love, where he became a standout in shot put. Early in his life, he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which he stated almost made his parents bankrupt in order to keep him on a proper diet. In 1977, Tiny had a minor car accident when he drove his vehicle through the front wall of an unoccupied apartment and stopped in the living room. And in 1982, while attending Long Beach City College, he became a Division II undefeated champion, breaking the school record 7 times in 1 year with a mark of over 61 feet 8 inches, a record that still stands today. After college, he trimmed down to 275 pounds, and despite never playing a game of football in his life, he tried out for the LA Rams and San Francisco 49ers, and ended up playing 2 exhibition games for the USFL team, the New Orleans Breakers, and at the time was bench pressing 500 pounds. After being cut, he was called back a few weeks later, but he was already getting into acting and declined the offer. His first role was Blue City with Walter Hill, which he considered a mentor, and went on to work on several movies together. In 1984, after being cast for the TV series First and 10, he requested to be written off the show after deciding he could no longer work on the same set as O.J. Simpson, claiming during an interview on the Hannibal TV that O.J. was the worst human being he had ever met in his life, even long before being accused of double murder in 1994. He also became close personal friends with John Candy as well as Michael Jackson, while recruited to work on the Remember the Time video, which was filmed over a 5-week period on a Hollywood backlot and directed by John Singleton. In 1989, he auditioned for the role of Zeus in No Holds Barred starring Hulk Hogan. Before going into the audition, he had already had the letter Z shaved into the side of his head and already had his boots made as well. Admittingly not knowing much about professional wrestling, he saw a huge opportunity. According to Tiny, at the time of his audition, he had just over $300 in his bank account, and Vince McMahon, while negotiating, directly deposited $75,000, making it impossible for Tiny to refuse the part. Vince McMahon would have Tiny appear at SummerSlam in order to promote the movie. During the filming, Hulk Hogan accidentally broke Tiny's nose during a fight scene, which they would use as the beginning of a storyline feud between the two, who actually became good friends in real life. Tiny began touring with the WWF and appearing at house shows, and even turned down carrying the world title at the advice of his agent, who was also Hulk Hogan's agent. His debut was on Wrestling Challenge, which aired on May 14, 1989, when he came up before a match and chased 2 enhancement talents out of the ring, as well as ring announcer Mike McGurk. This was not something that was originally planned when the No Holds Barred movie was filmed. Because of this, the shoulder pads that Tiny wore to the ring began to fall apart, as they were initially just made for the movie filming and not to be used past that. Because Tiny always entered the ring over the top rope, Andre the Giant did not like him, and he was also rumored to have heat with a lot of the other talent in the dressing room because of his fast rise to main event status, and he even received death threats. He appeared on the May 27, 1989 edition of Saturday Night's Main Event before Hogan's WWF World Heavyweight Championship title defense against the Big Boss Man in a steel cage. Boss Man's manager Slick introduced him. Zeus blocked Hogan from entering the cage and kicked him in the chest and hit him with a few double axe handles. Hulk Hogan laid on the ground while Zeus walked slowly back to the dressing room, and they cut to a commercial. On that same month, he would also do several interviews, including one at a live show with Mean Gene Okerlund, and also appeared on the Brother Love Show. On the July 29th edition of Saturday Night's Main Event, Zeus would accompany Randy Macho Man Savage to the ring and stand in his corner along with Sensational Sherri Martel while he faced Brutus the Barber Beefcake. When Beefcake put his finishing move, the sleeper on the Macho Man, Zeus interfered and Savage was disqualified. While Zeus had Beefcake in a bear hug, Hogan came to his rescue. Zeus would no-sell every move and shot that Hogan dished out, including a chair shot would only make Zeus smile. In SummerSlam of that same year, he would team with the Macho Man and face Hogan and Beefcake in the main event. He would continue in the WWF doing a series of interview segments with the Macho Man entitled The Moments of Serenity with Randy Savage and Zeus, who is now sporting a unibrow. That same year, Tiny, along with Sherri Martel, would appear on the Arsenio Hall show, while in the Zeus character ended the interview by chasing Arsenio and his band off the set, who was known to be a huge wrestling fan. In Survivor Series 1989, he would team with Ted DiBiase, the Barbarian and the Warlord against Axe, Smash, Hulk Hogan, and Jake Roberts, only to be disqualified after choking Hogan and shoving the referee. In 1989, the World Wrestling Federation scheduled a pay-per-view titled No Holds Barred, the match, the movie, to be held on December 27th of that same year. The program consisted of the film No Holds Barred in its entirety, followed by a match previously recorded at a Wrestling Challenge taping on December 12th at the Nashville Municipal Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee. The main event was set aside in a steel cage which pitted Hulk Hogan and Zeus on opposing teams. Hogan teamed with Beefcake, while the heel Zeus teamed with Randy Savage. Although there were initial plans to have Zeus and Hogan face off at WrestleMania 6 and have Hulk drop the belt, those plans were scrapped and they went with Hulk vs. Warrior instead. This was Zeus's last match in the WWF as he left shortly afterwards. Randy Savage continued to target Hulk Hogan over the WWF Championship. On July 7, 1990, Zeus fought Abdullah the Butcher in a double countout at a World Wrestling Council show in Puerto Rico. For his own safety, he had 2 armed police officers with him at all times during his trip to Puerto Rico, mainly due to the Bruiser Brody incident, which left Tiny uneasy about working in the territory. In his interview with Rosenberg in 2014, he admitted wrestling was the biggest rush he had in his life. In 1991, Pro Wrestling Illustrated ranked him number 500 of the top 500 single wrestlers in the PWI 500. He also appeared as Cletus in the 1992 film Trespass starring Ice-T and Ice Cube, originally named Looters, but the original title was scrapped due to the Rodney King verdict and actual looters rioting in Los Angeles at the time. In 1994, he turned down the part of Marcellus Wallace in Pulp Fiction. He later became a staple in Ice Cube's Friday movies as a neighborhood bully known as Debo, which he stated was inspired by Big U, a reputed kingpin of one of Los Angeles' most notorious Crip factions. In the movie, Debo would ride around the neighborhood on a squeaky bike that was heard from miles away, which drew fear from every character in the film. Ironically, in 1965, at the age of 7, a young Tom Lister would win a free bike during a promotion from Bob's Family Restaurant. The nickname Debo would follow him for the rest of his life, which he embraced and even made several appearances as Debo for both charity and church events. He would make a return to the world of professional wrestling in 1996 in WCW, resuming his on-screen feud with Hulk Hogan, this time known as Z-Gangsta. He debuted on the May 18, 1996 edition of Monday Night Nitro after being contacted by Hulk Hogan as part of the Alliance to End Hulkamania, culminating in a failure at Uncensored. He debuted with actor-wrestler Robert Swenson, who was billed as the Ultimate Solution, managed by Jimmy Hart. They would face Macho Man and Hogan in a 3-tier cage match with members of the Dungeons of Doom on one side and members of the Four Horsemen on the other. Sadly, Swenson would pass away of a heart attack shortly after at the age of 40 years old. Hulk Hogan, Davey Boy Smith, and James Caan gave eulogies at his funeral. In 2014, at the Orlando Urban Film Festival, he won Best Star Spotlight for his performance in No Weapon Formed Against Us. In 2016, he was nominated for the Best Bad Mother Award at the All Deaf Movie Awards. In 2019, he briefly revived his role as Debo, along with Chris Tucker during a church service in West Los Angeles, where he robbed Tucker for his chain on stage during his testimony. Later that year, he would also take to Instagram and announce he had started his own clothing line. In January of 2020, Tiny legally changed his name to Tiny Debo Lister, paying homage to his Friday character. Later that year, during an interview, he stated that a new Friday movie was already written but yet to be filmed. According to Ice Cube, the script had been delivered to New Line Cinema, but producers Tony Emmerich and Richard Brenner showed no interest in another Friday installment. In April of 2020, Tiny teamed up with the Pineapple Express, a cannabis delivery company, to deliver their product personally to 4 winners. He would make the deliveries at precisely 4:20 as Debo, to the surprise of the customers. He was a fan of both The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, and even after making hundreds of movies and working with top stars, he would still quote Bible verses during interviews instead of bragging about his own accomplishments. The athletic department of Lister's alma mater, Cal State, LA, sponsors an annual track meet in his name. Although Tiny never engaged in any gang activity, because he came from a Crip neighborhood, during his WWF tenure he refused to ride in a red car. Tiny was diagnosed with COVID-19 around August 2020 and overcame the illness. He became ill with symptoms similar to COVID-19 a second time in early December, showing weakness and trouble breathing, which forced him to cancel shooting for a film. His manager, Cindy McGowan, who said it was not normal for him to miss filmings, became concerned and sent her assistant to his house to give him vitamins and antibiotics. On December 10th, police were called to check on Tiny and found him dead in his home in Marina del Rey, California. He was 62 years old. The coroner's office investigated his cause of death, which originally was suspected to be from complications of COVID-19. However, the final autopsy report revealed that the cause of death was hypertensive and cardiovascular disease. Tiny's condition in the days before his demise was alarming, but he was confident he'd be taken care of by the man upstairs. During a live streaming Q&A with fans, he was noticeably not well as he struggled to speak at times and even nodded off, but continued on due to his dedication to his fans. Sources say his condition was much more noticeable in person. Condolences poured in from everyone from Ice Cube to Kid Ink to AEW Wrestling. And although playing a bully in several roles, he was known as the opposite in real life, very humble and grateful. That was the untold story of Tiny Lister, aka Zeus. Alan James Coage was a judoka and later professional wrestler. He won medals for the United States at several international judo competitions, including the heavyweight bronze medal at the 1976 Summer Olympics, becoming the second American to win a medal in judo. He later appeared in wrestling promotions such as the World Wrestling Federation, New Japan Pro Wrestling, Stampede Wrestling, and Polynesian Pacific Pro Wrestling under the ring names Bad News Brown, Buffalo Allen, and Bad News Allen, and many say was a blueprint to the Stone Cold Steve Austin character. So tell your grandmother, your three-legged dog, and that ugly goldfish you got. This is the untold story of Alan Coage, aka Bad News Allen. Alan was born in Harlem, New York City in 1943 and raised in St. Albans, Queens, which at the time was considered a disadvantaged neighborhood. He attended Thomas Edison High School and hung around with a gang called the Scotchmen Lords. In 1944, his father, Howard Allen Coage, was arrested and jailed for the illegal sale of beer, wine, and liquor. Alan was also routinely arrested several times and once spent a few days in a youth house where he was shocked with a vision of what could have been his future: drugs, jail, and death. At the age of 15, Alan began training in judo under Jerome McKay after seeing a poster for McKay's dojo on the New York City subway that read, "Don't let the hood beat you up and take your money." Many others saw McKay's poster, but unlike most who just took a lesson or two and hoped God would award them with a black belt, Alan was different. He immediately began an intensive training schedule of 4 days a week, 3 hours per day. He stuck to the schedule like a postman, rain, shine, sleet, or snow. This regimen allowed Alan to win first place at the Chicago Invitational Tournament after only 7 months of training, despite being only a white belt. Within 2.5 years, he would earn his black belt and named a Sandan. During high school, he was a thin pupil with a lack of confidence who would play handball, baseball, and basketball in his battles to prove himself. Described as a loner and rarely attending social events, as most of his friends were other judo students. He also spent much of his time going around to disadvantaged neighborhoods of his youth, doing his best to help at-risk youngsters who needed the kind of inspiration Al had never received as a young child. He would continue to do this in his free time without any benefit, fanfare, or publicity. Alan remained humble to the point where one of his fellow judokas would brag about his accomplishments, since he usually kept them to himself. His instructors would comment on how courteous and respectful he was, while most athletes his age level were flamboyant and cocky. Alan would continue his rigorous workout routine and adding a 2-mile run every night. Alan was inspired by meeting George Harris, who in 1961 was the last American to win a U.S. Grand Championship. After graduating in 1962 and majoring in electrical insulation, Alan got a job working in a bakery in Long Island, following in his father's footsteps. He attended the Manhattan Food Trade School, eventually becoming a foreman, but deep down inside had much bigger aspirations. In 1970, Alan relocated to Japan for 2 years, where he studied at the Nihon University, majoring and minoring in judo. In 1972, he narrowly missed making the Olympic team when he was beaten and suffered a knee injury. In 1975, Allen worked part-time as a bodyguard for Aretha Franklin, but in October of that same year, he struck gold in the heavyweight judo category in the Pan Am Games in Mexico City. When the team arrived in Mexico, Allen's roommate was Jimmy Martin, who was 138 pounds, loud and wisecracking, described as a poor man's Jim Cagney. A contrast to Allen, who was big, quiet, and soft-spoken, but the difference did not hinder Allen. In July of 1976, at the age of 32, Allen had been working as a bouncer at Julio's Warrenville Inn for the previous 3 years, and word got around he was not someone to mess around with. During the 1976 National AAU Championships in Baltimore, Allen failed to place in the heavyweight division after losing in an early round decision. In spite of all this, the American coaches felt that Allen would be the committee's wild card pick. After a meeting held immediately after the championships, due to his impressive credentials, the committee voted to move Allen to the open class section. That year at the Olympics in Montreal would be his first Olympic berth. This time he was down to 200 pounds in a lower weight class, where he would win a bronze medal. His victory made him the first African American to win a solo Olympic Games medal in a sport other than boxing or track and field. In 1976, along with former Olympic decathlon winner Milt Campbell, Allen received keys to the city of Plainville, New Jersey, presented by Mayor Paul J. O'Keefe. He was also invited to the White House by President Ford, but was discouraged he still wasn't able to make a living with the sport he loved and had to have a full-time job as either a bouncer or bodyguard. Allen retired from competitive judo following the 1976 Olympics due to financial frustrations and all-around internal politics. Allen's ride in judo was even more remarkable than the record indicates, as he was by no means a natural. He admitted to putting on a tough guy attitude as a teenager because he was afraid to let people see how inadequate he felt about himself. In October of 1977, Allen made his way to Japan, where he began training as a professional wrestler under Antonio Inoki in the New Japan Pro Wrestling Dojo. In 1977, he would debut under the ring name Buffalo Allen. Optimistic he would finally be able to make a living at something he loved doing. Now at over 260 pounds and bench pressing over 400 pounds, he was also squatting over 600 pounds. Allen made a one-off appearance in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation in February 1978, defeating jobber Frank Williams at a live event. He returned to the promotion in January of 1979 under the name Big Allen Coadge and wrestled for the WWF for the remainder of the year, appearing on several episodes of WWF Championship Wrestling. In late 1979 at Madison Square Gardens, teaming with JoJo Andrews, Allen challenged for the Tag Team Championship against Riki Choshu and Seiji Sakaguchi. Coadge's team was unsuccessful when Andrews submitted to a Boston Crab by Sakaguchi in a match that lasted just under 10 minutes. In 1982, Allen found a long-term home in Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling. While working for Stu Hart in his Stampede Wrestling promotion, Allen was suspended, quote-unquote, indefinitely by the commission, along with Archie the Stomper Goldie, for violating wrestling regulations during a bout earlier that month, using weapons in a match including a chair, cane, and a fork. While attacking each other, fans were shooken up, and a 14-year-old girl had her leg pinned under a chair while being trampled by other fans, but was not seriously injured. Stu Hart also reportedly had his license suspended because of the incident, and the commission ruled he would have to pay $10,000 to get it back. Allen also reportedly grabbed an elderly man in the audience and shook him. Allen, the Stomper, and even referee Cedric Hathaway were all suspended. Behind the scenes, Stu Hart was negotiating a deal with Vince McMahon to sell the promotion to the WWF. In 1984, he was back working for Stampede Wrestling when Vince McMahon reneged on the agreement. Allen remained with Stampede until 1988, with some tours of Australia, Florida, and had matches with wrestlers such as the Dynamite Kid and Bret Hart. He often referred to himself in interviews as the Ultimate Warrior. Allen returned to the World Wrestling Federation in early 1988 as Bad News Brown, and it was during that time he achieved his greatest notoriety. His trademark characteristic as Bad News Brown was never smiling. Either he kept an angry face or laughed loud at the expense of opponents' misfortunes. While the roster was mostly filled with ultra-virtuous baby faces and cowardly and monster heels, Bad News was something entirely different, a tough loner. While other heels were likely to form alliances with one another, Bad News was reclusive. Some say this was a blueprint to the Stone Cold Steve Austin character. His dislike for all fellow wrestlers was clear when he abandoned his team at the Survivor Series. Some memorable moments from his WWF tenure included winning the Battle Royal by eliminating Bret Hart, who was then a heel after a sneak attack, followed by a brief feud with WWF champion Macho Man Randy Savage and his manager Miss Elizabeth in late 1988 that led to more main event matches. On the March 11, 1989 edition of Saturday Night's Main Event, Bad News memorably took a microphone towards the end of his match with Hulk Hogan and told him that it was time for the Ghetto Blaster. As he was getting ready to execute it, however, Hogan got out of the way, leading to him miss the move and suffer an eventual loss. Allen's next feud was with Rowdy Roddy Piper, starting at the 1990 Royal Rumble, where he was eliminated by Piper, then illegally eliminated Piper. This led to Allen being ridiculed, which he would counter by calling Piper out for wearing a skirt. This culminated at WrestleMania 11, in which a match both men were counted out. Allen was initially planned to continue the feud with Piper, but since neither man would agree to lose to each other, the program was scrapped, and instead Allen was assigned to work with Jake the Snake Roberts, where Bad News used a sewer rat against Jake Snake. Around this time, Allen was worked into a storyline where he attacked WWF President Jack Tunney on the Brother Love Show. Allen eventually left the WWF after SummerSlam 1990, claiming Vince McMahon failed to live up to his promises to make him the company's first African-American champion, which reportedly affected him and his wife. As written in the autobiography of the Dynamite Kid, Allen's legitimate toughness was displayed in a confrontation involving Andre the Giant, who allegedly made a racist comment on a tour bus for New Japan Pro Wrestling. Allen overheard it and made the driver stop the bus, walked off, and demanded the Giant get off and fight him one-on-one. Andre would not move from his seat and later apologized for the remark. In 1993, Allen was inducted into the Judo Hall of Fame as well as the Black Belt Magazine Hall of Fame. Allen continued to work in independent promotions for several more years, including Japan's Shoot Wrestling, UWFI promotion. In 1994, he worked in South Africa and feuded with former Stampede wrestler Gama Singh. He also appeared on Polynesian Pacific Pro Wrestling, where he was their heavyweight champion. He also worked for Tokyo Pro Wrestling from 1997 to 1998 and worked in independent shows in Calgary and Western Canada. Stampede Wrestling made a brief return in 1999, where he was a color commentator along with Mauro Ranallo. Allen retired in 1999 due to knee damage. His last match was May of that year in Regina, Saskatchewan. He continued occasionally working independent shows for friends while living in Calgary with his wife and had considered starting a promotion himself. Allen died of a heart attack on the morning of March 6, 2007 at Rocky View General Hospital in Calgary, minutes after being rushed there due to chest pain. 3 weeks prior to his death, he had undergone a hip replacement surgery. On May 24, 2007, a memorial show was held which drew over 600 fans, promoted by Devin Hannibal Nicholson, who faced Abdullah the Butcher in the main event. Also on the card, Samoa Joe, Tito Santana, and Jim Neidhart, among others. It was reported Goldust, who was scheduled to perform, was paid $800 in advance, no-showed the event, as well cashed in his plane ticket for an additional $900. At one point, Rick Bogner and Allen ran a wrestling school out of Calgary, Alberta. He was working on a book about his career and other wrestling stories just before his death. That was the untold story of Bad News Allen.